Picture this, an ancient Egyptian obelisk silhouetted against the dying light of a desert sun. It stands impossibly tall, a needle of solid granite piercing the heavens, a monument built to last for eternity. For centuries, we've been told these were simply grand trophies, symbols of pharaohs' pride and power, erected to glorify their names and their gods. But what if that story is incomplete? What if the true purpose of these stone giants has been hidden in plain sight all along? What if these structures weren't just monuments to be seen, but powerful devices to be used, harnessing energies and forces that we are only just beginning to comprehend with our modern science? This isn't a question from a fantasy novel. It's the heart of a profound medieval mystery that surrounds the Egyptian obelisks and points to a power beyond belief. We begin a journey not merely into the sands of Egypt, but into the very nature of ancient knowledge, into a forgotten understanding of the world that challenges everything we think we know about our past. This is a story of cosmic ambition carved in stone, a legacy of a civilization that may have seen the universe in ways we have forgotten. It's a mystery that began to resurface centuries later in the heart of the medieval world. Long after the last pharaoh was laid to rest, long after the deserts had reclaimed temples and the Nile's course had subtly shifted, these obelisks remained. To the knights, scholars, and mystics of the Middle Ages, they were objects of intense fascination and fear. They were relics of a wisdom so advanced it seemed almost supernatural, and they sparked legends. Whispers traveled along trade routes and were recorded in forbidden manuscripts, tales that these stones could channel the light of the stars, that they could influence the growth of crops from miles away, or that they served as anchors for invisible energies that flowed through the earth itself. The very scale of their construction defied medieval understanding. How did they move a single 500-ton block of stone, let alone raise it perfectly vertical? The answer, some dared to suggest, was that the builders didn't just use brute force. They used a forgotten physics, a resonance with the natural world that turned impossible tasks into manageable feats. This is the enigma we are about to explore together. We are going to peel back the layers of conventional history and venture into a realm where archaeology meets esoteric tradition, where stone and sky were once considered partners in a grand, energetic dance. We will examine the curious alignments of these obelisks with celestial bodies, the peculiar properties of the granite from which they were hewn, and the persistent legends from cultures across the globe that speak of worlds spanning power grids activated by towering stones. You are about to discover why so many, from Renaissance magi to modern researchers, have become convinced that these silent, majestic sentinels hold the key to a lost technology. So join me as we unlock the secrets of the Egyptian obelisks and prepare to see these ancient wonders not as cold, dead monuments, but as potential components of a system humming with a power we are only now relearning to sense. The journey into the unbelievable starts now. To truly grasp the depth of this mystery, we first need to look past the grand scale and see the obelisk for what it is, a feat of engineering so precise it borders on the impossible. Consider its basic anatomy. We have a single, unbroken shaft carved from one piece of the hardest granite on Earth, often reaching heights equivalent to a 10-story building. At its apex sits the pyramidion, a small, pyramid-shaped cap that was frequently sheathed in electrum, a dazzling alloy of gold and silver designed to catch the first and last rays of the sun. And covering all four sides are the meticulously carved hieroglyphs, far more than simple decoration. Now, the conventional explanation, which you'll find in any textbook, is that these were solar symbols, petrified rays of the sun god Ra, representing the pharaoh's divine connection and eternal power. And on one level, that makes perfect sense. They are monuments of immense spiritual and political significance. But this is where the mystery truly begins, because the sheer physical effort involved forces us to ask a much deeper question. Why go to such extravagant lengths for a symbol? Moving a single obelisk from the quarries at Aswan to its final resting place involved a logistical nightmare that would challenge even modern engineers. We're talking about a solid stone needle weighing between 200 and 500 tons. Imagine trying to lift the weight of a fully fueled Boeing 747 jetliner, but made of solid rock, and then transporting it hundreds of miles up the Nile without it sinking the barges, and finally erecting it with such perfection that it would stand for millennia. The official story relies on ramps, ropes, and immense human labor, and while that is certainly part of the answer, it feels incomplete. It's like saying the Cathedral of Notre Dame was built with hammers and chisels. Technically true, but it misses the profound knowledge of architecture, acoustics, and sacred geometry that guided every cut. This is the very gap that captured the medieval imagination. Alchemists and Hermetic philosophers, studying fragments of ancient Egyptian knowledge that had filtered into Europe, began to propose a radical idea. They saw these structures not as passive symbols but as active instruments. To them, the obelisk was a technological device, a machine carved from stone. They looked at the pyramidion cap gleaming with precious metals and wondered if it was more than a beacon for prayers, if it was a conductor designed to draw down energy from the atmosphere or the cosmos. They studied the hieroglyphs and suspected they were not just prayers, but perhaps encoded instructions or resonant frequencies intended to interact with the stone itself. The specific type of granite, rich with crystalline quartz, was known to have piezoelectric properties. That is, it can generate a small electrical charge under mechanical stress. Was the obelisk vibrating subtly in the wind or from seismic activity, generating a tiny, constant energy field? This notion transforms the obelisk from a silent monument into a potential power source, a component in a larger, invisible network. This perspective, born in the alchemical labs of the Middle Ages and revived by modern theorists, suggests that the ancient Egyptians were not just master stonemasons and astronomers, but also engineers of a subtle energy science that we are only now beginning to rediscover. This sets the stage for us to investigate the specific properties and placement of these stones, to see if we can find the evidence for this forgotten function written not in parchment, but in the stone itself. And it is here, at the very pinnacle of the obelisk, that we find perhaps the most compelling clue to its enigmatic function, the pyramidion. This was not merely a decorative finial to the medieval mind, it was the very heart of the machine. Crafted from electrum, a brilliant blend of gold and silver, this capstone was designed to gleam under the sun and shimmer beneath the moon. While modern archaeology interprets this as a symbolic representation of the sun god's radiance, the alchemists and natural philosophers of the Middle Ages saw something far more pragmatic. They looked at that gleaming metal cap and theorized it was a conductor, a specialized component designed to capture energies invisible to the naked eye. Consider the properties of the materials themselves. Gold is one of the most efficient conductors of electricity known to man, highly resistant to corrosion, making it a perfect, permanent contact point. Silver, while it tarnishes, is an even better conductor. By combining them into electrum, the ancients may have created a supremely effective terminal, positioned at the highest possible point to interact with the atmosphere. These medieval thinkers, who were themselves pioneering early experiments with magnetism and static electricity, reasoned that the pyramidion was doing exactly what a lightning rod does, but for a much subtler and more constant form of energy. They believed it was drawing down not bolts of lightning, but a continuous, life-giving force from the heavens, what some called the ether or the spiritus mundi, the spirit of the world. This concept of a universal energy permeating the cosmos is one we find echoed in many ancient traditions, from the prana of India to the Kai of China. The obelisk, in this view, was a technological device designed to harvest and concentrate this very force. This transforms our understanding of the entire structure. If the pyramidion is the collector, then the monolithic granite shaft beneath it becomes the conduit, Think of the obelisk not as a solid block of stone, but as a finely tuned antenna. Its immense height and precise, tapering shape would have made it ideal for resonating with specific frequencies, much like a modern radio tower. The granite itself, packed with quartz crystals, supports this idea. Quartz is piezoelectric. It generates a small electrical charge when compressed or vibrated. A towering obelisk standing exposed to the elements would be in a constant state of subtle vibration from wind, distant thunder, or even the seismic hum of the earth itself. This perpetual, gentle stress could have caused the crystalline structure of the granite to generate a weak but measurable electromagnetic field around the obelisk. The pyramidion, acting as a focal point, could then have been designed to direct this harnessed energy downward, channeling it into the temple complex or the surrounding land. The implications of this are staggering. It suggests that these monuments were part of a sophisticated geo-energetic system. Their precise placements were not arbitrary. They were chosen to amplify the natural energies of the earth, much like acupuncture needles are placed on the body's meridians to stimulate the flow of chi. This would explain why obelisks were so often positioned at key points within temple precincts, at the terminus of ceremonial avenues, or in alignment with other sacred sites. They weren't just marking a holy place, they were activating it, saturating the area with a vitality that could have been sensed by the priests and perhaps even influenced agriculture, water sources, and human consciousness. For the medieval scholar, this was a terrifying and awe-inspiring glimpse into a lost science, a civilization that had learned to plug its sacred architecture directly into the grid of the planet and the cosmos. This idea of a networked world powered by stone leads us directly to the next piece of the puzzle, the mysterious alignments and global connections that hint at a system far grander than any single monument. To fully appreciate why these structures ignited such wild speculation, we must try to comprehend the monumental task of their creation, a process that seems to defy the technological capabilities of the ancient world. The journey of an obelisk began in the granite quarries of Aswan, where workers would identify a flawless vein of stone. They weren't merely cutting out a block, they were slowly, painstakingly liberating a 500-ton needle from the living bedrock. Using only stone pounders made of even harder dolerite, crews would pound a trench around the proposed shaft day after day, week after week, in a relentless percussion that must have echoed for miles. The precision involved is staggering. They had to work blind, feeling for fractures and following the grain of the stone, all to create a perfectly rectangular prism with sides that were flawlessly smooth and straight. One wrong tap, one misjudgment, and the entire monolith could fracture, abandoned for centuries as a testament to human fallibility, just like the famous unfinished obelisk that still lies in the Aswan quarry today. This immense, partially carved giant shows us the scale of the ambition and the sheer, brutal labor that was the foundation of it all. This is where the official archaeological explanation meets the whispers of legend. Modern engineers, looking at the problem, propose a system of massive wooden barges, intricate rope networks, and earthen ramps that would have required the coordinated effort of thousands of laborers. It's a plausible, brute force solution, yet it feels inadequate to many. How do you load a stone heavier than a Statue of Liberty onto a wooden barge without it splintering and sinking? How do you maneuver it up the Nile's currents? And most mystifying of all, how do you erect it, lifting hundreds of tons of solid granite to a perfect vertical position, without the sophisticated cranes and hydraulics we have today? The conventional ramp and rope method seems fraught with catastrophic risk. This gap between the possible and the seemingly impossible is precisely where medieval legends flourished. Mystics and scholars poring over ancient texts proposed a far more elegant and mysterious solution, that the Egyptians had mastered the laws of sound and vibration. These legends spoke of a lost harmonic science, It was said that priests or skilled artisans could use specific chants, tones, or precisely tuned instruments to resonate with the granite itself. The idea was that every material has a natural frequency at which it vibrates. By matching this frequency exactly, you could, in theory, neutralize the effects of gravity or create a field of anti-gravity around the object. The stone would become weightless, or at least light enough for a small team to guide it effortlessly into place. This wasn't seen as magic, but as a supremely advanced physics, a deep understanding of the vibrational fabric of reality. The medieval mind, which saw correspondences between music, mathematics, and the cosmos, found this idea profoundly compelling. It transformed the Obelisks' creation from a story of slave labor into a symphony of applied knowledge, a ritual where sacred sound literally moved mountains. This belief in a lost sonic technology was not just a flight of fancy. It was thought to be a secret preserved and sought after by clandestine groups throughout the Middle Ages. Certain orders of knights, particularly those who had contact with the Middle East during the Crusades, were rumored to have brought back fragments of this esoteric knowledge. Alchemical texts and hermetic manuscripts from the period are filled with cryptic diagrams and references to the power of the word and the music of the spheres, all hinting at the ability to manipulate physical matter through acoustic resonance. Secret societies were allegedly dedicated to rediscovering and harnessing this power, believing it to be the true source of the pyramid builders' prowess. For them, the obelisks were not just proof of this knowledge, they were the ultimate demonstration of its application. The very existence of these monoliths was a permanent challenge, a silent dare to future civilizations to figure out how it was truly done. So we are left with two compelling, yet opposing narratives. On one hand, we have the modern archaeological consensus, a testament to incredible human ingenuity, organization, and sheer determination using levers, pulleys, and mud brick ramps. It's a story of a civilization that could achieve the impossible through the coordinated might of its people. On the other hand, we have the enduring mystical tradition, passed down through legends and secret societies, which argues that such a feat required more than just muscle. It demanded a forgotten science of energy and resonance. This perspective suggests the ancients possessed a way of working with nature rather than conquering it through brute force. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Maybe the Egyptians did use ramps and ropes, but combined them with an intuitive or deliberate understanding of resonant frequencies to make the lifting and positioning far easier and more precise than we can currently imagine. The absence of any definitive technical manual from the period leaves the question tantalizingly open, forcing us to look not just at how they were built, but where they were placed, as the next clue to their true purpose might be written in the stars themselves. So we arrive at a pivotal moment in history, a shift that forever changed the landscape of both Egypt and Europe, the Roman conquest. The legions of Rome did not just conquer the land of the pharaohs, they became utterly captivated by its most striking symbols. Beginning with Emperor Augustus after his victory over Cleopatra and Mark Antony, a systematic campaign began to uproot these monolithic needles from their sacred Egyptian foundations and transport them across the Mediterranean. To the modern eye, this looks like the ultimate act of imperial trophy hunting, a way for a new empire to claim the prestige and legitimacy of an older, more revered civilization by literally stealing its monuments. But when viewed through the lens of the medieval mystery, this plunder takes on a far more sinister and strategic dimension. What if the Romans weren't just collecting symbols, but were actively seizing what they believed were powerful, functional devices? Consider the sheer, mind-boggling effort involved. Transporting a 400-ton obelisk from the heart of Egypt to the center of Rome was a logistical endeavor more complex and dangerous than most military campaigns. The Romans had to build colossal, specialized ships that could withstand the weight and the treacherous sea voyage. Historical accounts describe vessels so massive they were virtually floating temples, crewed by hundreds of men, their holds custom built to cradle a single, priceless shaft of granite. The journey itself was perilous. One such ship, carrying an obelisk for the Emperor Caligula, was said to have been so vast it was used as the foundation for the lighthouse at the port of Ostia after its voyage. This was not a casual undertaking. It was an operation of state-level importance, consuming immense resources. Why go to such extreme lengths for a trophy? The medieval theorists who pondered this concluded that the Romans, particularly their emperors and esoteric advisors, understood that these obelisks were more than inert stone. They believed them to be repositories of power, or perhaps even active generators of it, and by relocating them to Rome, they could effectively tap into that power and redirect it to fuel their own empire. This theory is powerfully supported by the rituals that surrounded the obelisk's re-erection in their new homes. When an obelisk was raised in the Roman Forum or the Circus Maximus, it was not a quiet, bureaucratic event. It was a grand public spectacle, a meticulously orchestrated ceremony infused with religious and mystical significance. The emperor himself would often preside, performing rites that echoed the dedication ceremonies of the original Egyptian pharaohs. This wasn't simply about putting up a decoration. It was an act of consecration, a ritual designed to awaken the stone and bond its perceived power to the Roman state and its ruler. They were, in effect, trying to reboot an ancient machine on foreign soil. The locations chosen were also profoundly significant. Obelisks were placed at the spiritual and political heart of Rome in the Vatican circus, where they overlooked gatherings of the populace, and in key city squares that were nodes of civic life. This careful placement mirrors the original Egyptian practice of situating them within sacred temple complexes, suggesting the Romans were attempting to replicate the geo-energetic network they had observed in Egypt, creating a new power grid for their own capital. This obsession with harnessing foreign power reached its zenith with Emperor Constantine the Great and his foundation of a new capital, Constantinople. He ordered the removal of an enormous obelisk from Alexandria, intending for it to be the centerpiece of his new Christian Rome in the east. Though he died before it could be shipped, his son Constantius Roman II finally completed the task, erecting the monolith in the Hippodrome of Constantinople. This act is particularly revealing. Here was a fervently Christian emperor, inheritor of a faith that outwardly rejected the pagan gods of Egypt, yet he still felt compelled to install a pharaonic obelisk at the very core of his city. This suggests a belief that transcended official religion, a deep, almost primal conviction in the inherent, tangible power of the object itself. The medieval mind saw this as clear evidence that the true nature of the obelisks was an open secret among the ruling elite, a piece of arcane knowledge passed down through initiatic circles. The power they represented was considered so potent and real that even a new world religion could not afford to ignore it. Instead, it sought to co-opt and control it. So we are left with a compelling narrative that challenges the simplistic trophy theory. The Roman plunder of the obelisks can be seen as history's most ambitious heist, not of art but of active technology. The medieval mystery tradition posits that the Roman emperors, advised by scholars who studied Egyptian lore, were not mere thieves of beauty, they were energy pirates. They saw a civilization that had mastered the art of channeling cosmic and terrestrial forces through stone, and they resolved to capture that capability for themselves. The monumental effort of transportation and the sacred ceremonies of re-erection were all part of a deliberate process to transplant the beating heart of Egyptian power into the body of the Roman Empire. This attempt to steal the fire of the gods, so to speak, forever scattered these enigmatic devices across the world, setting the stage for their next great mystery, their rediscovery and reinterpretation by the scholars, mapmakers, and secret societies of the Renaissance, who would look upon these same stones and see not just Roman trophies, but encoded keys to a lost universal science. This deliberate transplantation of ancient power into the new heart of Christendom presents one of history's most fascinating paradoxes. Scattered throughout Rome, and most strikingly in Vatican City itself, stand these silent, needle-like sentinels from a pharaonic past. The most prominent of all is the mighty obelisk that dominates St. Peter's Square, a monument that had witnessed the martyrdom of Christians before being moved to its current position by order of Pope Sixtus V in 1586. On the surface, this seems bewildering. Why would the epicenter of the Catholic Church, an institution that waged a long and determined campaign against paganism, choose to erect and venerate such an overtly pagan symbol? The conventional explanation is one of symbolic conquest, that the Church was literally capping the symbols of a defeated religion, turning the very emblems of ancient power into trophies that testified to the triumph of the cross. Yet, when we examine the meticulous effort and profound ritual surrounding their placement, a more intriguing possibility emerges, one whispered in medieval and Renaissance esoteric circles, that the Church's highest initiates understood these obelisks were not merely symbols but functional instruments of immense spiritual power, and they were strategically deploying them. The campaign of Pope Sixtus V to reposition Rome's fallen obelisks was far more than an urban beautification project. It was a massive, spiritually charged engineering undertaking. He entrusted this Herculean task to his brilliant architect and engineer, Domenico Fontana, who faced the unprecedented challenge of moving the 330-ton Vatican obelisk from its old location beside the basilica to the center of the new square. The operation was conducted with the solemnity of a religious rite. Fontana's detailed account describes a city holding its breath. Workers were sworn to silence on pain of death to prevent any distracting chatter that might lead to a misheard command and disaster. As the massive wooden lifting towers, ropes, and capstans strained, the Pope himself was said to have given a signal for the cross to be raised high atop the obelisk the very moment it was lifted from the ground, a potent act of spiritual reclamation. The entire event was framed not as a simple construction job, but as an exorcism and a baptism. The obelisk was purified, blessed, and its ancient pagan dedication was explicitly replaced with Christian inscriptions and prayers. This was more than just attaching a cross to the top. It was a ritual designed to reprogram the device, to redirect its perceived flow of energy from its old gods to the new faith. This leads us directly to the compelling theories about their true purpose in this new Christian context. One persistent idea is that the obelisks, particularly the one in St. Peter's Square, were placed with precise knowledge of ley lines, those hypothetical alignments of ancient and sacred sites that are said to channel terrestrial energy. According to this view, the Vatican Hill was not chosen at random. It was already a powerful energetic node, a fact perhaps recognized long before by the Etruscans and the Romans, who built a circus and a necropolis there. By erecting the obelisk at the center of this node, the Church was effectively driving a massive energetic antenna directly into the heart of its power grid, amplifying the spiritual potency of the entire area and making St. Peter's Basilica a focal point for divine energy. The square itself, designed by Bernini more than half a century later with its embracing colonnades, is often described as the motherly arms of the Church. In an esoteric sense, this circular embrace can be interpreted as a container, a focusing element that shapes and contains the energy field generated or amplified by the central obelisk, creating a vast, open-air cathedral charged with invisible force. Another fascinating layer involves the concept of spiritual defense and control. In the worldview of the Renaissance, which still held elements of medieval cosmology, the world was populated by both benevolent and malevolent spiritual forces. Pagan monuments were often believed to be inhabited by lingering, potentially dangerous earth spirits or elemental beings. The strategic placement of consecrated obelisks at key points across Rome, not just in the Vatican, but at major churches like Santa Maria Maggiore and the Lateran, can be seen as an act of spiritual geomancy. The church was creating a protective network, a circuit of power designed to sanctify the entire city. These reconsecrated monoliths would act as spiritual lightning rods, drawing in the chaotic energies of the pagan past and the untamed landscape, then transmuting them through the power of Christ into a stable, orderly, and sanctified force that reinforced the church's authority. It was a way of taming the wild genius loci, the spirit of the place, and binding it to the service of the new order. This transforms the obelisk from a passive trophy into an active component in a city-wide system of metaphysical control, a silent guardian maintaining a sanctified energy field over the heart of Christendom. The implications of this are profound, suggesting a hidden lineage of esoteric knowledge within the church itself. The popes and architects who orchestrated these projects were often men of the Renaissance, immersed in the rediscovery of Hermetic philosophy, Neoplatonism, and alchemy traditions that sought to understand the hidden laws of the universe and the flow of spiritual energies. For these initiates, the obelisk was not an idol to be destroyed, but a masterwork of ancient natural philosophy to be understood and repurposed. They may have believed that the ancient Egyptians, in their wisdom, had discovered the fundamental principles of this spiritual physics, and that by correctly positioning these pre-tuned devices, they could harness those same laws for a Christian world. Therefore, the obelisks standing in Rome are not embarrassing pagan relics that the Church forgot to remove. They are, in this interpretation, the crown jewels of a secret technology, deliberately and expertly deployed to channel, amplify, and control the very forces of faith and divine presence, making the Vatican not just the administrative center of a religion, but the powered heart. Global spiritual organism. The journey of the obelisk from sacred symbol to speculated energy device takes another dramatic turn as we cross the Alps and enter the turbulent intellectual landscape of post-revolutionary France. Standing proudly in the center of the Place de la Concorde in Paris is the Luxor obelisk, a gift from Egypt that is far more than a simple token of diplomatic friendship. This specific monolith and the story of how it came to rest on French soil opens a window into the mind of one of history's most formidable figures, Napoleon Bonaparte. His campaign in Egypt was not merely a military expedition. It was a grand scholarly mission accompanied by a legion of scientists, artists, and linguists whose work would birth the modern science of Egyptology. But Napoleon's interest ran deeper than academic curiosity. He was a man deeply immersed in the occult and hermetic traditions of his time, and he saw in Egypt the source of a primordial wisdom that he believed could be harnessed to shape a new world order. The acquisition of the Luxor obelisk was, in this light, the ultimate act of collecting a piece of that power, a tangible fragment of an ancient science he sought to reactivate. The site chosen for its erection, however, adds a layer of profound and haunting significance. The Place de la Concorde was not always a place of concord or peace. During the French Revolution, it was known as the Place de la Révolution, and it was here that the guillotine stood, its blade falling on thousands, including King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette. The ground was soaked in blood, the very epicenter of a national trauma. This choice of location forces us to confront a critical question. Why place an object believed to channel cosmic energies at a site so deeply stained by violent death and collective anguish? One compelling theory is that this was a deliberate act of spiritual purification. The revolutionary government had already renamed the square to promote harmony, but the memory of the terror lingered. The obelisk, in the view of those versed in esoteric thought, could act as a massive spiritual reset button. Its purported ability to channel and transmute energy might have been directed toward cleansing the area of its dark residue, neutralizing the negative psychic imprints and restoring a sense of balance and order to the heart of the nation. It was an attempt to use an ancient tool of light to dispel a very modern shadow. Yet an alternative and perhaps more unsettling interpretation exists. What if the intention was not to purify the darkness but to harness it? From an occult perspective, places of intense emotion and death are not just voids of negative energy, they are also reservoirs of immense raw power. The fervor of the mob, the finality of execution, the collective release of life, these events could be seen as having charged the location with a potent, if volatile, force. By erecting the obelisk at this exact spot, Napoleon and his advisors might have been attempting to cap this wellspring of energy, much like capping an oil well. The obelisk would then function as a stabilizer and a conductor, drawing upon the chaotic power generated by the revolution and transmuting it into a stable, directed force that could fuel the ambitions of a new era, the era of the French Empire. This transforms the Luxor obelisk from a passive monument into the central component of a grand alchemical experiment, designed to turn the lead of bloody revolution into the gold of imperial glory. The logistical feat of bringing the obelisk to Paris only reinforces the idea that this was a project of supreme importance. The French government commissioned a custom-built, state-of-the-art ship named the Luxor to sail to Egypt, navigate the Nile, and carefully transport the 250-ton monolith on a journey of thousands of miles. The process of lowering, shipping, and then re-erecting it in the center of Paris was a technological marvel of the 1830s, a national spectacle that captured the public's imagination. But for those who saw the world through an esoteric lens, this was more than an engineering challenge. It was a ritual of transference. They were not just moving a stone, they were transplanting a node of ancient power from its native energetic grid in Thebes to a new network in the West. The careful orientation of the obelisk, its placement within the precise geometric layout of the square, and the addition of a new golden pyramidion to its apex, all suggest a conscious effort to integrate it functionally into the city's design. It was to become the new spiritual and energetic landmark for Paris, a declaration that the city was not just the political capital of France, but a powered center in its own right, drawing upon the authority of the pharaohs and the raw, untamed force of its own revolutionary past to propel France into a dominant future. In the end, the story of the Parisian Needle sits at the crossroads of history, archaeology, and occult speculation. It embodies Napoleon's dual nature as both an Enlightenment rationalist and a seeker of hidden knowledge. Whether viewed as a grand gesture of diplomatic archaeology, a sophisticated tool for spiritual cleansing, or a daring attempt to tap into a potent historical energy source, its presence demands a more nuanced understanding. It challenges us to see these ancient structures not as inert museum pieces, but as objects whose perceived power has compelled emperors, popes, and revolutionaries to uproot and reposition them for millennia. The Luxor obelisk in the Place de la Concorde is a permanent monument to this enduring fascination, a silent witness to the belief that the stones of Egypt hold a secret that transcends time, a secret that the powerful of every age have sought to claim as their own. While the Paris obelisk arrived with imperial pomp, its twin bound for London embarked on a voyage steeped in tragedy and supernatural dread, a journey that would cement the legend of the obelisk's curse in the modern imagination. This monument, today known as Cleopatra's Needle on the Victoria Embankment, began its trip from Alexandria in 1877, encased in a custom-built, cylindrical iron pontoon named the Cleopatra, which was towed by the steamship Olga. The endeavor was meant to be a triumph of British engineering and global reach, a symbol of an empire bringing the treasures of antiquity to its capital. But the sea itself seemed to revolt. As the strange convoy entered the Bay of Biscay, a violent storm erupted, threatening to send the 200-ton stone needle to the bottom of the ocean. The Cleopatra began to wallow and take on water, becoming a deadly, unmanageable burden in the raging seas. In a desperate attempt to save the crew of the pontoon, sailors from the Olga launched a lifeboat, but it was capsized by the monstrous waves and 6 men were lost to the depths. The event was immediately and sensationally reported in the press not as a simple maritime disaster, but as the terrifying awakening of an ancient curse. The public was captivated by the idea that the monolith, having slumbered for millennia, had exacted a blood price for its disturbance. From a purely rational perspective, this was a tragic accident born of miscalculating the ferocity of the Atlantic and the difficulty of towing such an unwieldy vessel. But when we view this event through the lens of the medieval mystery tradition, a far more chilling interpretation emerges. What if these persistent stories of a curse were not primitive superstition, but an intuitive, folkloric recognition of the obelisk's inherent energetic field being violently disrupted? The medieval mind, which perceived the world as a web of visible and invisible forces, would have understood that such a powerful object, likely emplaced for centuries on a specific energetic site in Alexandria, would have settled into a state of equilibrium with its environment. It was, in a sense, dormant but active, part of a stable, localized energy system. To rip it from its foundation, encase it in iron, a metal known for its ability to block or interfere with subtle energies, and then subject it to the chaotic, violent motions of a storm-tossed sea, could be seen as a profound act of metaphysical violence. The legends might be describing the catastrophic release of this contained power, an energetic backlash as the stone's stable resonance was thrown into violent dissonance. The idea of a cursed object often revolves around the concept of a violated taboo or a disturbed guardian spirit. But what if the guardian was not a supernatural entity, but the integrity of the energy field itself? The 6 men who perished did so in the direct vicinity of the obelisk while struggling to manage the vessel that contained it. From an esoteric standpoint, they were not killed by a vengeful ghost, but were victims of a catastrophic energetic discharge, much like technicians being electrocuted while tampering with a live, high-voltage power line without understanding the nature of the current they were handling. The storm itself could be interpreted as a contributing environmental factor, a massive atmospheric disturbance that further agitated the already destabilized energetic charge of the monolith, creating a perfect storm of physical and metaphysical turbulence. The iron pontoon, rather than protecting the obelisk, may have acted as a chaotic resonator, amplifying the dissonance and creating a localized zone of dangerous, unpredictable forces. This tragedy forces us to confront a critical distinction between a superstitious curse and a misunderstood natural phenomenon. The medieval adepts believed that the ancients worked with natural laws that we have since forgotten. In their view, an obelisk was a finely tuned device, and its power was neutral. Neither good nor evil, its moral character was determined by how it was used. To treat it with reverence and understanding was to harness its benefits. To treat it as inert cargo, subjecting it to brutal, ignorant handling, was to risk triggering a dangerous reaction. The death of the 6 crewmen, then, was not a punishment from an angry god, but a fatal lesson in the consequences of mishandling advanced technology whose operating manual had been lost to time. The obelisk was not malicious, it was simply powerful, and its power, when mismanaged, became lethal. The Victorian public, still steeped in a world where folklore and science coexisted, instinctively grasped this nuance, labeling the event a curse because they had no other vocabulary for a force that was both physical and paranormal. The eventual, successful completion of the journey did little to dispel this aura of danger. After being salvaged and brought to London, the obelisk was erected in 1878, but not before a series of peculiar additions were made. A time capsule was buried beneath it containing items meant to represent Victorian Britain, and perhaps most tellingly, 2 large bronze sphinxes were placed on either side facing the needle. Official explanations cite purely decorative reasons, but within the symbolic language of esoteric tradition, this arrangement is profoundly significant. The Sphinx is a guardian, a creature of riddles and secrets. Placing them as sentinels could be seen as a subconscious, or perhaps deliberate, attempt to bind or control the obelisk's power, to station guardians that would prevent its energy from running wild in the heart of the empire. It was a ritual act of containment, an architectural safety measure for a device whose true potential they feared. The story of Cleopatra's Needle's voyage, therefore, stands as one of the most compelling modern arguments for the obelisk's active nature, not as a cursed idol, but as a piece of sophisticated, energetic hardware that demanded respect and understanding, a demand that was paid for with 6 lives in the stormy waters of the Bay of Biscay. Across the Atlantic, the final journey of an Egyptian obelisk unfolds in the heart of the modern world, completing a triangulation of power that now connects London, Paris, and New York. The twin to London's, Cleopatra's Needle, arrived in Central Park in 1881, a gift from the Khedive of Egypt to the United States, a nation barely a century old yet rapidly ascending as a global force. On the surface, this was a gesture of international goodwill, a symbol of cultural exchange between an ancient civilization and a new one. But almost from the moment it was erected, a different, more shadowy narrative began to take root. In the bustling, pragmatic energy of New York City, this ancient stone needle seemed strangely out of place, an anomaly that sparked modern legends and conspiracy theories questioning its true purpose. Why would this specific monument be placed not just in America, but at the emerging financial and cultural epicenter of the Western world? From the perspective of our ongoing mystery, this placement feels far from random. It appears as the final, deliberate move in a centuries-long game of positioning these powerful devices at the world's most influential nerve centers. The modern theories surrounding the New York obelisk are diverse, yet they all orbit a central, compelling idea: that it functions as an active conduit within the city's invisible infrastructure. Some researchers of Earth energies point to its location on what they believe is a major ley line, a powerful stream of terrestrial force that runs through Manhattan. They propose that the obelisk, with its crystalline granite structure and unique shape, acts as a tuning device for this energy, potentially amplifying it or directing its flow. Others, looking at the city's relentless, driving ambition and its rise to become the financial capital of the world, suggest a more psychological influence. They speculate that the obelisk's purported energy field might interact with the collective consciousness of the millions of people around it, subtly reinforcing traits of ambition, innovation, and a relentless focus on material power. In this view, the obelisk isn't just a passive monument, it's a psychological amplifier, intensifying the very characteristics that define modern New York, effectively charging the city's relentless drive for success. This leads directly to one of the most persistent and provocative conspiracy theories, that the obelisk serves as a marker or a component for a new world order. This term, often associated with secret societies aiming for global governance, has surprisingly deep roots in medieval prophetic traditions. Visionaries and mystics from the Middle Ages, like Joachim of Fior, wrote extensively about a coming third age of the spirit, a new epoch of world history that would be preceded by great upheaval and the establishment of a new universal order. In these esoteric systems, the erection of specific monuments at key geographical points was seen as a necessary ritual to anchor this new age into physical reality. The obelisks in London, Paris, and New York, positioned at the vertices of a powerful transatlantic triangle, perfectly fit this ancient blueprint. They are not merely decorations, they are, according to this theory, the permanent physical anchors for a new global energy grid, a system designed to centralize and control the flow of power, both energetic and political, in the modern world. The logistics of its installation in Central Park only add fuel to these speculative fires. The process was fraught with difficulties, including a complicated engineering feat to move it from the Hudson River to the park, and a fundraising scandal that nearly derailed the entire project. This pattern of struggle and controversy mirrors the tragic voyage of its London twin, reinforcing the idea that moving these objects disrupts a deep-seated equilibrium. Furthermore, its current condition is telling. Unlike the carefully maintained obelisks in Rome or London, the New York Needle has suffered severe erosion from over a century of exposure to the city's harsh pollution and weather. The hieroglyphs, once crisp and deep, are now in many places worn almost completely smooth. To some, this is simple environmental damage. To others, it represents a form of energetic decay or even a deliberate obfuscation, as if the encoded instructions on its surface are being erased, leaving behind only the raw, functioning power of the monolithic shape itself, a mute, powerful machine whose user manual is slowly vanishing. When we step back and view the complete picture, from the sacred temples of Thebes to the imperial heart of Rome, to the papal power of the Vatican, to the revolutionary energy of Paris, the imperial reach of London, and finally, the global financial dominance of New York, a stunning pattern emerges. It is a pattern that suggests a continuous, hidden lineage of knowledge. The powerful elites of every age, from Roman emperors and Renaissance popes to modern financiers and political architects, seem to have been drawn to these objects. They have repeatedly gone to extraordinary lengths to acquire them, transport them across oceans, and erect them at the very centers of their influence. This is not a series of unconnected historical accidents. It is a coherent, millennia-long tradition of recognizing and attempting to harness a specific form of power inherent in these stone giants. The New York obelisk, therefore, is not an outlier. It is the most recent installation in an ancient network, a modern power conduit silently standing in the park, continuing its age-old work of channeling and focusing forces that shape our world in ways we are only beginning to suspect. But of course, the most compelling argument for this technological interpretation lies not just in the shape of the obelisk, but in the intricate tapestry of symbols that covers its surface from base to pyramidion. We have all seen the hieroglyphs, those elegant pictures of birds, eyes, and serpents, and we have been taught they are a historical record, prayers to the gods, and the names of pharaohs. And they are. But what if they are also something far more complex? What if these carefully arranged symbols constitute a form of code, a lost language of energy that describes not just the glory of a king, but the operational manual for the device itself? This idea that the hieroglyphs are a sophisticated schematic is a cornerstone of the medieval mystery, a belief that beneath the literal meaning lies a hidden layer of scientific and esoteric instruction. To understand this, we must first abandon our modern compartmentalization of science and spirituality. For the ancient Egyptians, these concepts were one and the same. The world was alive with interconnected forces, and their writing reflected this holistic view. A symbol like the ankh, which we translate as life, was not just an abstract concept. In this esoteric framework, it represented a specific, tangible energy, the universal life force. A carving of a solar deity like Ra was not merely an object of worship. It was a diagrammatic representation of a power source, much like we might use an icon of a battery in a technical manual. When medieval alchemists and Renaissance scholars like Giordano Bruno studied these symbols, they did so with this exact mindset. They believed the hieroglyphs were a philosophical language where each pictogram conveyed a complex principle of natural philosophy, a piece of the puzzle describing how the cosmos functions. The obelisk then becomes a physical manifestation of this philosophical system, and its inscriptions are the wiring diagram. This theory is powerfully supported by the incredible precision and intentionality of the inscription's placement. The symbols were not randomly scattered. They were meticulously arranged in vertical columns and horizontal lines, creating specific sequences and patterns that covered the entire surface area of the stone. From an energetic perspective, this arrangement is critical. Imagine the obelisk as a resonant cavity like the body of a guitar. The hieroglyphs carved deep into the granite would alter the surface texture and the acoustic properties of the monolith. The specific sequence of symbols, a falcon followed by a sun disk, then a water ripple, could be designed to create a unique vibrational signature as the wind passed over the carvings or as the stone itself vibrated at its resonant frequency. Furthermore, many of these carvings were originally inlaid with precious metals like gold, silver, or electrum. These metals are not just dazzling in the sun, they are among the best conductors of electricity on Earth. The inlay would have created conductive pathways across the surface of the non-conductive granite, effectively turning the obelisk skin into a complex circuit board. The flow of any subtle electrical charge generated by the piezoelectric granite could have been directed along these metallic inlays, guided by the symbolic instructions of the hieroglyphic code. One of the most fascinating concepts to emerge from this line of thinking is the idea of resonant frequencies being encoded in the text. We know that sound and vibration were central to Egyptian spiritual practice. Certain words and phrases were considered to hold innate power, a concept modern scholars call Heka. What if the true power of these phrases was not just in their meaning, but in their actual sonic frequency when spoken aloud? The specific combination of hieroglyphs in a given column might represent a chant or a tonal sequence that, when vocalized by a trained priest at the base of the obelisk, would cause the entire structure to vibrate in sympathy. This is the principle of resonance. When one vibrating object matches the natural frequency of another, it can cause the second object to vibrate with immense amplitude. A priest, by chanting the correct code inscribed on the obelisk, could theoretically be tuning the massive stone needle, exciting its crystalline structure to generate a stronger piezoelectric charge or to resonate with a specific celestial frequency. The hieroglyphs in this light are not just a prayer to be read, but a frequency to be sung, an activation code for the machine. This perspective transforms our entire understanding of these monuments. The obelisk is no longer a silent, static object. It becomes a dynamic system, a power source in its granite core, a collector in its golden pyramidion, and a control interface in its coded hieroglyphic skin. The medieval mystics who first proposed these ideas were attempting to reconstruct a lost science of sacred engineering, a science where language, architecture, and energy were seamlessly integrated. They looked at the obelisk and saw a device whose user manual was written in plain sight, yet required a key to decipher, a key they believed was hidden in the very philosophical traditions the Egyptians had pioneered. This notion that the ancients encoded advanced operational knowledge within their spiritual texts challenges us to look at all ancient inscriptions with fresh eyes, wondering what other secrets might lie buried not in the sand, but in the symbols we thought we had already translated. The concept that truly unites these scattered stone giants across continents is the modern theory of ley lines, an idea that gives physical form to the medieval intuition of a world crisscrossed by invisible streams of power. Ley lines are hypothetical alignments that connect ancient sacred sites, stone circles, temples, burial mounds, and of course obelisks across vast distances. While the term itself was coined in the 1920s, the underlying principle is ancient, echoing the beliefs of countless traditional cultures that the Earth is a living body with its own system of energy meridians. These lines are thought to be channels for a subtle terrestrial force, often called Earth energy or telluric current, and the sites built upon them are seen as amplifiers or taps for this power. When we apply this lens to the obelisks, their seemingly random placement suddenly reveals a hidden, intelligent design. They were not erected just anywhere. They were deliberately positioned at powerful nodal points, the intersections and concentrated hotspots of this global energy web, acting as colossal acupuncture needles for the planet. Consider the evidence written directly onto the landscape. The original home of the Luxor obelisks in ancient Thebes, for instance, sits on a site that has been sacred for millennia, part of a vast temple complex aligned with celestial events. But when you pull back to a wider map, you find that this location in Egypt forms part of a longer alignment that stretches across the Mediterranean, connecting to other ancient power centers. Similarly, the obelisk brought to Constantinople by the Romans was placed in the Hippodrome, a location that was the ceremonial heart of the city, and many researchers argue a pre-existing energetic node. Even more compelling are the obelisks still standing in their original positions in places like Karnak and Heliopolis. These cities were not just political capitals, they were considered the primal mounds of creation in Egyptian cosmology, the very places where the gods first brought order from chaos. This was not a symbolic choice alone. It suggests these sites were believed to be the literal wellsprings of the Earth's creative energy, and the obelisks were the technological instruments built to harness and direct that phenomenal force. This idea of a conscious global network becomes undeniable when we trace the paths between these monuments. One of the most famous ley lines proposed by researchers is the so-called St. Michael Line in England, which runs straight through major sites like Glastonbury Tor and Stonehenge. While England lacks Egyptian obelisks, the principle is identical: the use of towering stone markers on a powerful energy alignment. Now transpose this concept onto a world map. Look at the obelisk in the Vatican, positioned on a hill that was sacred long before Christianity. Draw a line from there to the ancient sacred sites of Greece and you find a pattern. Look at the obelisk in Paris, placed at a point of immense historical trauma and subsequent renewal. These are not isolated monuments, they are components in a circuit. Medieval mystics, even without our cartographic tools, seemed to sense this interconnectedness. Their worldviews, heavily influenced by Neoplatonic and Hermetic philosophy, described a universe where everything was linked by sympathetic vibrations and invisible flows of spirit. They would have understood the obelisks as permanent tuning forks, placed to keep the harmonic resonance of the earth stable and vibrant. But how could ancient civilizations, separated by oceans and millennia, have possibly coordinated such a grand design? The answer lies not in a single, centralized architect, but in a shared human sensitivity to the land itself. Proponents of the ley line theory suggest that our ancestors possessed a heightened perception, an ability to sense these earth energies directly through methods like dowsing or simply by feeling the qualitative difference in the atmosphere at certain locations. A place that felt inherently sacred, that inspired awe and reverence, was likely a powerful energy node. The obelisk, then, was the ultimate expression of this recognition. It was a way to mark the spot, to anchor the energy, and to amplify its effects through a specific, engineered form. The medieval builders of cathedrals, who often constructed their great churches on pre-existing pagan sites, were likely continuing this same tradition, using their own sacred geometry to tap into the ancient, flowing currents that the obelisks had been built to master. This creates a continuous thread of understanding, a hidden history of geomancy, the art of aligning human structures with the earth's spirit, that connects the pharaohs to the pyramidions gleaming over modern cities. This extraordinary connection between the obelisk and the Earth's hidden energies finds its ultimate expression not in geography, but in the secretive laboratories of the medieval alchemists. For these seekers, the ultimate prize was the philosopher's stone, a legendary substance said to possess the power of transmutation, to turn base lead into pure gold, and by analogy, to transform the base human soul into an enlightened spiritual being. What if this was not merely a metaphor for personal purification, but a literal, physical process that could be engineered on a grand scale? This leads us to a radical theory, that the Egyptian obelisk itself was a macro-scale version of the alchemical apparatus, a stationary, monumental philosopher's stone designed to perform the great work of transmutation not on metals in a crucible, but on the very fabric of reality. To understand this, we must step inside the alchemical worldview, where matter and spirit were not separate realms but different states of the same universal substance. The alchemist's laboratory was a microcosm of the universe, and every piece of equipment, the alembic, the retort, the furnace, represented a cosmic principle. The process of transmutation was a carefully orchestrated sequence of dissolution, purification, and recombination, often described by the famous formula, solve et coagula, meaning to dissolve and to coagulate. Now imagine scaling this process up to the size of a 300-foot granite tower. The obelisk in this interpretation becomes the ultimate alembic. Its towering shaft acts as the central column where the great work occurs. Its pyramidion cap is the receiving vessel for the celestial first matter, and its foundation, anchored deep into the earth, serves as the furnace, drawing up the telluric or earthly energies. The entire structure was a single, integrated machine for spiritual and energetic alchemy. The materials themselves are a direct giveaway to this function. Alchemists were obsessed with specific metals and their correspondences to planetary forces. Gold was the metal of the sun, representing perfection and incorruptibility. Silver was the metal of the moon, representing purity and reflection. The electrum pyramidion, a blend of both, was the alchemical rubis, the divine hermaphrodite, a perfect fusion of solar and lunar principles. This gleaming cap was not just decorative, it was the point of contact for the Azoth, the universal life force that alchemists sought to capture. The shaft of granite, with its high quartz content, was seen as the prima materia, the primordial chaotic base matter that needed to be subjected to the alchemical process. The constant, subtle piezoelectric charge generated by the stone was the equivalent of the alchemical fire, a gentle but persistent heat that cooked the raw cosmic energies, preparing them for transmutation. So, what was the final product of this monumental process? What was the gold that the obelisk was designed to produce? The answer likely exists on multiple levels. On a spiritual level, the obelisk was believed to transmute raw cosmic chaos into ordered, sanctified energy that could facilitate enlightenment and communication with the divine. A priest or initiate standing within its energized field might experience an accelerated spiritual awakening, a feeling of being raised up vibrationally, just as the obelisk itself reached for the sky. This transmutation of consciousness was the true gold the alchemist sought. On a more practical, physical level, there are persistent legends that this refined energy had tangible effects. Some medieval texts drawing on older Egyptian traditions suggest these energies could be used for healing, purifying water, or even enhancing the fertility of the land for miles around. The obelisk, by this logic, was a public utility for spiritual and physical well-being, a machine that took the disordered forces of the cosmos and the earth and refined them into a benevolent, life-sustaining power. This profound secret, the obelisk as a functional philosopher's stone, was likely knowledge reserved for the highest ranks of the priestly and ruling classes. The intricate hieroglyphs covering its surface can be reinterpreted through this lens. They were not merely historical records, they were the encoded recipe for the great work. The sequence of symbols could detail the precise spiritual and energetic operations needed to activate and maintain the transmutative process, a set of instructions meant only for those initiated into the mysteries. This explains why the powerful and the learned of subsequent eras, Roman emperors, Renaissance popes, Napoleon, were so desperate to possess and re-erect these stones. They weren't just collectors of antiquities, they were aspiring adepts who understood they were acquiring a pre-built, supremely powerful alchemical engine. They sought to control the process of transmutation itself, believing that whoever mastered the obelisk could, in effect, master the flow of life force and divine power, shaping the destiny of empires and the evolution of human consciousness from the highest levels of spiritual physics. This idea of the obelisk as a tuned resonator brings us to one of its most fascinating and least understood potential functions, its role as a colossal sonic device. To grasp this, we need to consider the very substance from which it was made. Granite isn't just a hard stone, it's a complex crystalline matrix, and it has remarkable acoustic properties. Think of a fine crystal glass. When you tap it, it rings with a clear, pure tone. Granite behaves in a similar way, though at a much lower, deeper frequency. It has a high sonic velocity, meaning sound waves travel through it exceptionally fast and with very little energy loss, allowing it to sustain vibrations for a long time. The ancient builders, through their intimate generational knowledge of stone, may have intuitively understood this. They weren't just carving a shape, they were carefully sculpting a massive tuning fork, shaping the granite's mass, density, and proportions to achieve a specific, fundamental resonant frequency. The specific geometry of the obelisk is absolutely critical to this theory. Its towering, tapering shape is not merely for aesthetic grandeur. This form is acoustically brilliant. A tall, slender object with a wide base and a narrow apex is naturally predisposed to vibrate in a very controlled and specific manner. Modern acoustic engineers understand that the dimensions of an object directly determine its natural vibrational modes. The precise ratios used in the obelisk, the relationship between its height, width, and the mass of the pyramidion, could have been meticulously calculated to tune the entire structure to hum at a frequency that interacted with its surroundings in a particular way. This resonant frequency would likely have been very low, what we would call infrasound, a vibration far below the range of human hearing. You wouldn't hear it with your ears, but you would feel it in your bones, a subtle, pervasive hum that permeates everything in its vicinity. So, what would be the purpose of such an inaudible hum? The potential effects of targeted infrasound on both the human body and the physical environment are profound and are only now being seriously investigated by modern science. We know that certain low frequencies can induce states of deep calm, awe, or even mild disorientation. They can affect brainwave patterns, shifting consciousness towards meditative or trance-like states. This provides a powerful scientific basis for the legendary experiences reported at ancient sacred sites. A priest or initiate standing in the shadow of a vibrating obelisk might not have heard anything, but they could have felt a palpable shift in their perception, a feeling of being connected to something vast and powerful, an ideal state for communion with the divine. The obelisk, in this view, becomes a machine for altering consciousness, not through chemicals or force, but through the subtle, physical manipulation of vibration. This concept extends beyond the mind and into the body itself. There are persistent medieval accounts, often dismissed as pious legends, of miraculous healings occurring at locations where Egyptian obelisks or similar monolithic stones were once erected. Pilgrims would travel for miles to touch these stones, reporting cures for ailments and a sudden return of vitality. If we apply the sonic theory, these stories start to sound less like miracles and more like applied, albeit forgotten, science. The principle of using vibration for healing is not new. Today, we have technologies like lithotripsy, which uses focused sound waves to shatter kidney stones non-invasively. Could the obelisk have been a macro-scale version of this? Its specific resonant frequency, channeled through the ground or transmitted through the air, might have been capable of stimulating cellular repair, improving circulation, or breaking up calcifications in the body. The pilgrims who felt better after their visit may have been experiencing the tangible effects of a deep tissue sonic therapy session, administered by a stone tower that had been humming its healing note for centuries. Furthermore, the potential for these resonant frequencies to influence the physical environment opens up even more staggering possibilities. Sound at sufficient power can physically move matter. We've all seen videos of a powerful speaker shattering a glass by matching its resonant frequency. Now imagine an obelisk, a 300-ton speaker made of resonant granite, vibrating in tune with the earth. Could such a device, if its frequency was precisely calibrated, have been used to stabilize the ground against earthquakes or to subtly influence water tables, guiding underground water toward the surface? This might sound like science fiction, but it aligns perfectly with the abilities attributed to the most advanced Egyptian priests, who are said to command the very elements. The obelisk wouldn't be commanding nature through magic, but through a sophisticated understanding of harmonic physics, using its sustained, low-frequency drone to bring the local environment into a state of energetic and physical harmony. When we weave together the acoustic properties of granite, the intentional geometry of the obelisk, and the persistent legends of its power, a compelling picture emerges. This was not a silent monument. It was a living, vibrating entity, constantly emitting a low, fundamental tone that shaped the reality around it. It tuned the consciousness of those nearby for spiritual receptivity. It offered a form of vibrational healing to the physical body, and it acted as a stabilizer for the local environment, harmonizing the subtle energies of the earth and sky. The medieval accounts of miracles at these sites were likely the result of people experiencing this sophisticated technology without having the vocabulary to describe it as anything other than divine intervention. The true miracle was the genius of the builders, who understood that the universe is built on vibration, and that by carving a single, perfect note into stone, they could resonate with the very fabric of creation. At the heart of this mystery lies a secret not just of power, but of pure, perfect form. The obelisk's enduring mystique may have less to do with what it was made of and more to do with its precise, almost supernatural shape. Its silhouette is not a random artistic choice. It is a masterclass in applied sacred geometry, a physical equation carved in stone. The ancient Egyptians and the medieval scholars who later studied them understood that the universe is not built chaotically, but according to an underlying mathematical order. They believed that by replicating these cosmic proportions in their architecture, they could create structures that resonated in harmony with the very fabric of creation. The obelisk, therefore, is far more than a tall, pointy stone. It is a tuning fork for reality itself, and its design is its tuning specification. The most famous of these divine proportions is the golden ratio, often represented by the Greek letter phi, approximately 1.618 to 1. This ratio appears with stunning frequency throughout nature, in the spiral of a nautilus shell, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, and even the proportions of the human body. It is a ratio that the human eye perceives as inherently beautiful and balanced. When we analyze the classic obelisk form, we find this ratio echoed throughout its design. The relationship between the height of the shaft and the width of its base often approaches phi. The pyramidion itself, the small capstone, frequently follows golden ratio proportions in its own dimensions. This isn't a coincidence. The builders were deliberately encoding the pattern of life and growth into the very bones of their monument. They were creating an object that was, by its fundamental geometry, alive with the same organizing principle that governs galaxies and sunflowers. This obsession with divine geometry did not die with the pharaohs. It was kept alive and fervently studied in the monasteries and universities of the Middle Ages. Perhaps the most famous figure in this lineage was the Italian mathematician Leonardo Fibonacci, who in the 13th century introduced a sequence of numbers to the Western world where each number is the sum of the two preceding ones, 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on. As this sequence progresses, the ratio between successive numbers gets closer and closer to the golden ratio. Fibonacci saw this pattern as evidence of a divine blueprint, a mathematical signature of God in nature. Medieval scholars, upon rediscovering classical texts and encountering knowledge from the Arab world, became convinced that structures like the Egyptian obelisks were physical proof that the ancients had already mastered this universal language. They looked at the obelisk and saw not a pagan idol, but a three-dimensional representation of the Fibonacci sequence, a monument built from the same numerical code that underpins the cosmos. This perspective transforms our understanding of the obelisk's function. If its shape is a physical manifestation of the universe's fundamental harmonic, then it becomes a perfect conduit or amplifier for cosmic order. Think of it like a musical instrument. A well-made violin with its specific proportions and materials resonates beautifully when its strings are played, producing a clear, pure tone. An obelisk, with its divine geometrical proportions, is designed to resonate with the background hum of the universe. Instead of vibrating with sound, it vibrates with order, with harmony, with the very principle of creation. This is why medieval mystics believed these structures could bring harmony to a chaotic world. A society that erected such a monument at its center was, in effect, plugging its civilization into the stable, ordered frequency of the cosmos, hoping to instill that same harmony into its laws, its agriculture, and the minds of its people. The ultimate purpose of this geometric precision was alignment, not just of stone upon stone, but of human consciousness with a higher reality. The architects of these monoliths understood that our perception of the world is shaped by our surroundings. We feel calm and centered in a beautifully proportioned room and agitated in a cramped, chaotic space. The obelisk was the ultimate sacred space, but one engineered on a colossal scale. By standing in its presence or by aligning one's gaze with its perfect lines, a person was subtly retuning their own mind. The flawless geometry of the structure would, in theory, help to quiet the internal chaos of human thought, aligning the individual's consciousness with the serene, mathematical order of the divine. It was a tool for enlightenment, a lever for the soul, using the immutable laws of mathematics to elevate human awareness from the mundane to the cosmic. This grand ambition, to use architecture as a bridge between the human and the divine, finds a powerful parallel in the great Gothic cathedrals built centuries later. The master masons who designed Notre Dame or Chartres were direct heirs to this esoteric tradition of sacred geometry. They used the same golden ratio and geometric principles like the Vesica Piscis to determine every aspect of their designs, from the floor plan to the soaring height of the spires. They were building their own obelisks in a new form, creating vast stone vessels designed to elevate the spirit of every person who stepped inside. The key difference is one of enclosure. The Gothic cathedral turns the sacred geometry inward, creating a controlled environment for spiritual experience. The Egyptian obelisk, in contrast, turns it outward, projecting that harmonizing influence into the open air, aiming to sanctify not just a building, but an entire landscape, a city, or even a kingdom. Both, however, share the same profound goal: to use the silent, persuasive power of perfect form to connect humanity with the eternal. Yet to truly comprehend the obelisk is to stand beneath it at dawn on the summer solstice, to witness the first ray of sunlight strike its gilded cap with a fire that seems to ignite the very stone. This dramatic alignment was the cornerstone of its public identity, a colossal symbol of solar devotion, an arrow pointing directly to the heart of the sun god Ra. In the official state religion, the obelisk was the petrified ray of the sun, a means for the pharaoh, the son of Ra, to commune with his celestial father. Its gleaming pyramidion served as a beacon, a point of contact between the earthly and divine realms, and its very presence was a declaration that the power of the sun was manifest in the ruler who commanded its construction. This solar connection is one of the most well-documented and universally accepted aspects of Egyptology, but it is precisely this established fact that conceals a deeper, more enigmatic layer of purpose. What if the worship of the sun was not merely a spiritual metaphor, but a sophisticated scientific understanding cloaked in religious terminology? What if the obelisk was not just a symbol pointing to a god, but a functional device pointing to a power source? This is where the esoteric traditions preserved and expanded upon by medieval mystics part ways with conventional interpretation. These thinkers looked at the same evidence, the solar alignments, the gold-capped peaks, the inscriptions to Ra, and saw not simple idolatry but advanced physics. They proposed that the term sun god was a cultural label for a universal, energetic phenomenon. In their view, the sun was not merely a ball of fire in the sky, but the local representative of a cosmic, life-giving energy that permeates all of space. This energy, which some medieval alchemists termed the astral light or the solar logos, was understood as a fluid, radiant plasma of both spiritual and physical substance. The obelisk, then, was not an object of worship, but a sophisticated piece of technology engineered to interface with this immense flow of cosmic power. Its purpose was to harvest, concentrate, and direct this solar plasma energy for practical applications, turning a sacred symbol into a working power station. The evidence for this technological function is written into the very calendar of the ancient world. The alignments of obelisks with the solstices and equinoxes were not just for ceremonial pomp, they were critical for operational timing. These solar events represent peaks in the Earth's energetic relationship with the Sun. The solstices, when the Sun reaches its highest or lowest point in the sky, were seen as moments of maximum energetic influx, while the equinoxes, with their perfect balance of day and night, represented periods of stabilized harmonic flow. Medieval solar festivals, such as the bonfires of midsummer, were not mere pagan holdovers. They were the folk memory of a time when humanity understood these celestial turning points and sought to participate in them. The positioning of an obelisk meant that at these key moments, its entire form would be perfectly aligned to receive this intensified solar energy. The pyramidion would act as a primary collector, and the monolithic shaft, tuned by its sacred geometry, would channel this power down into the earth or into the connected temple complex, operating on a celestial schedule that turned the obelisk into a kind of cosmic battery, charging and discharging with the rhythms of the year. This idea of the obelisk as a receiver for a non-physical solar energy finds a startling parallel in the work of a 20th century genius, Nikola Tesla. Tesla dreamed of tapping into the Earth's own electrical field and transmitting power wirelessly through the atmosphere. His Wardenclyffe Tower, with its tall, central spire, was designed to do exactly that, to resonate with the Earth's natural frequencies and draw upon what he believed was a limitless source of environmental energy. The structural and functional similarities to an obelisk are uncanny. Both are towering structures designed to interact with the atmosphere and the Earth's subtle energies. Both use a conductive cap, Tesla's copper dome, the obelisk's electrum pyramidion as a collector. Both rely on principles of resonance to amplify their effect. For the medieval astrophysicist, Tesla would not have been an inventor but a rediscoverer. He was, in their view, recreating with copper wire and alternating current what the Egyptians had accomplished with resonating granite and sacred geometry. The obelisk was the ancient world's Wardenclyffe Tower, a permanent installation for harvesting what Tesla called the wheelwork of nature. This perspective forces us to reconsider the entire spiritual landscape of ancient Egypt. The great temple complexes, with their forests of obelisks, were not just places of prayer, they were massive power plants. The priests were not merely ritualists, they were the engineers and operators of this sophisticated energetic grid. The daily rituals, the chants, the offerings, these can be reinterpreted as maintenance procedures, activation codes, and calibration exercises designed to keep the system running at peak efficiency. The goal was to saturate the kingdom with this refined solar energy, which would explain the legendary fertility of Egypt, its astounding architectural achievements, and the profound spiritual awareness attributed to its culture. The sun was the fuel and the obelisk was the engine. This transforms our understanding from a civilization that worshipped a star to one that had learned to collaborate with it, building a society in harmony with the most powerful source of energy in our solar system, a partnership between human ingenuity and cosmic power that has remained unmatched for millennia. But this profound understanding of the obelisk as a tool for enlightenment and harmony carries with it a chilling and inevitable counterpart, a shadow side that medieval mystics and modern conspiracy theorists alike have dared to explore. If these structures can truly elevate human consciousness, could that same power be inverted? If they can harmonize a population's spirit, could they not also be used to suppress it, to pacify, or to control? This is the most controversial and unsettling facet of the mystery, the idea that the obelisk's ability to influence the mind was not always a gift, but could be wielded as a weapon of mass psychological domination, a secret technology of control passed down through the corridors of power for millennia. The very placement of these monoliths at the epicenters of religious and political authority throughout history becomes, in this dark interpretation, not a coincidence but a pattern of deliberate deployment. Consider the historical trail we have already followed. These stones were systematically transplanted from their native soil in Egypt to the heart of the Roman Empire, then to the Vatican, then to the capitals of burgeoning world powers like London, Paris, and New York. The consistent pattern is undeniable. They are magnets for authority. The medieval mind, steeped in a worldview where spiritual and temporal power were two sides of the same coin, would have seen this not as trophy collection, but as the assembly of a control network. In their view, the obelisk's resonant field, its ability to generate infrasound and emit a subtle energy, could be calibrated for more than just healing or spiritual awakening. It could be tuned to a frequency that induces not harmony but docility, not inspiration but submission. The legends of entire populations feeling a sense of awe and involuntary reverence in the shadow of these stones takes on a more sinister hue. Was this awe a genuine spiritual experience, or was it the intended effect of a psychological broadcast, a low-frequency signal designed to produce feelings of insignificance and deference to the ruling power that owned the monument? This theory finds a disturbing echo in the very warnings that fill medieval grimoires and religious texts about the dangers of idolatry. On the surface, these warnings are purely spiritual. Do not worship false gods or their physical representations. But when read through the lens of this esoteric technology, the prohibition takes on a new, more literal dimension. What if the idol was not condemned because it represented a rival god, but because it was an active, functioning device that could manipulate the minds of those who gathered around it? The biblical story of the golden calf, for instance, is not just about a spiritual betrayal. It depicts a population that falls into a chaotic, suggestible state in the presence of a man-made object. Could this be an ancient, allegorical account of a mass consciousness event, a demonstration of how a resonant object could be used to break down individual will and create a malleable collective psyche? The medieval church's intense fear of pagan idols might have stemmed from a hidden knowledge that these were not merely statues, but operational technology with tangible psychological effects. The mechanism proposed for this form of control is as sophisticated as it is frightening. We have already explored how the obelisk's infrasonic hum could potentially alter brainwave patterns, nudging consciousness toward a meditative, receptive state. But what if that same principle could be pushed further? What if, by slightly altering the resonant frequency, perhaps through ritual chants, specific ceremonial activities, or even mechanical means we no longer understand, the effect could be shifted from calm receptivity to passive trance? This would not be the cartoonish idea of mind control with zombies and remote controls. It would be far more subtle and insidious, a gentle, pervasive pressure on the collective mood of a city square or a national capital. It would be a technology that encourages conformity, discourages critical thought, and reinforces the status quo by making the population psychologically comfortable with it. The obelisk in the public square, then, becomes the ultimate tool for social engineering, a stone broadcaster ensuring that the vibes of the city align perfectly with the interests of those in power. This grim possibility forces us to re-examine the motivations of every powerful figure who ever sought to possess an obelisk. Were the Roman emperors, the Renaissance popes, and Napoleon simply admirers of ancient art, or were they practicing a form of energetic statecraft? When Pope Sixtus V raised the obelisk in St. Peter's Square with such solemn ritual, was he only sanctifying a pagan symbol, or was he activating a device to solidify the spiritual authority of the papacy over the hearts and minds of the faithful? When the French government placed the Luxor obelisk on the blood-soaked ground of the Place de la Concorde, was it an act of purification, or was it an attempt to cap the revolutionary fervor of the populace and channel that volatile energy into a stable, governable form for the new empire? The pattern suggests a continuous, hidden tradition among the elite, a clandestine understanding that whoever controls the resonant landmarks of a culture controls the subconscious of its people. In the modern era, this theory has found new life, pointing to the obelisk standing outside the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, and the Vatican's ongoing presence in St. Peter's Square. To those who subscribe to this view, these are not random architectural choices. They are declarations. They are a silent confirmation that the ancient science of influencing consciousness through resonant stone is not only real but is still in use today, operating in plain sight yet hidden by our own disbelief. The obelisk, therefore, stands as the ultimate symbol of this age-old dilemma of power. It represents humanity's highest aspiration to touch the divine and harmonize with the cosmos, but it also embodies our deepest fear, that the very tools we create for enlightenment can be perverted into the most subtle and totalitarian instruments of control ever devised, a silent technology of domination whose only sound is the quiet hum of submission. And so our search for the true nature of the obelisk's power leads us to a different kind of brotherhood, one whose name still echoes with equal parts reverence and intrigue, the Knights Templar. Founded in the early 12th century to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, this order of warrior monks would, in just 200 years, become one of the most powerful and enigmatic organizations in medieval Europe. While their military prowess and financial acumen are well documented, it is their prolonged exposure to the heart of ancient civilizations that fuels our mystery. For nearly 2 centuries, the Templars were not just visitors to the Holy Land. They were its guardians, its excavators, and its most dedicated students. Their headquarters was not in a European castle, but on the very Temple Mount in Jerusalem, a site so steeped in layers of sacred history that it was believed to be a nexus of immense spiritual power. It is here, amidst the ruins of Solomon's temple and in the shadow of lands once ruled by pharaohs, that we must consider an extraordinary possibility, that the Templars did not just uncover gold or relics, but something far more valuable, the lost operational secret of the Egyptian obelisk. Their position granted them unprecedented access. While Crusader kings fought for territory, the Templars conducted what can only be described as a decades-long archaeological dig beneath the Temple Mount. Historical records are sparse, deliberately so, but legends abound. They speak of the knights discovering vast, hidden chambers containing not just treasure, but ancient manuscripts and artifacts preserving the esoteric sciences of Babylon, Persia, and Egypt. These were not simple soldiers. They were a highly disciplined, literate, and secretive order. It is entirely plausible that among the scrolls they found were texts detailing the principles of sacred geometry, earth energies, and resonant architecture that had been used to construct the great monuments of antiquity, including the obelisks. This knowledge, which had been fragmented and lost in the West, would have been recognized by the Templars for what it was, a blueprint for generating and harnessing power. They would have understood that the obelisk was not a random symbol but a precisely engineered device, and they resolved to bring this revolutionary understanding back to a Europe that was only just emerging from the Dark Ages. The evidence for this knowledge transfer is not written in a single document, but is encoded in the stones of the structures they left behind. When the Templars returned to Europe, immensely wealthy and influential, they embarked on a colossal building campaign, financing the construction of a network of churches, castles, and most famously, the great Gothic cathedrals. Look at a cathedral like Chartres or Notre Dame de Paris, and you are not looking at a simple place of worship. You are looking at what can only be described as a spiritualized obelisk laid on its side and turned inside out. The architectural revolution they helped pioneer is a direct reflection of the principles we have been exploring. The obelisk's function was to channel celestial energy downward. The Gothic cathedral, with its vertiginous vaults and soaring spires, is designed to do the exact same thing. Its entire form is an act of aspiration, reaching for the heavens to draw divine energy into the sacred space below. The specific architectural innovations speak volumes. The use of pointed arches and ribbed vaults is not merely an aesthetic choice. It is a structural system that allows for unprecedented height and the inclusion of massive stained glass windows. This creates a vessel that is both incredibly strong and filled with filtered, transformative light. The light itself becomes the medium of the sacred, just as the sunlight striking the golden pyramidion of an obelisk was the starting point for its energetic process. Furthermore, the floor plans of these cathedrals are meticulously laid out using the same sacred geometry, the golden ratio Fibonacci sequences that we find encoded in the proportions of the obelisk. The master masons, many of whom were part of or influenced by the Templar network, were using this ancient mathematical language to tune their buildings, to make them resonate in harmony with the universe. The cathedral, therefore, becomes a complex energy device designed to elevate the consciousness of everyone within its walls, using the same fundamental principles as the monolithic towers of Egypt, but adapted for a Christian Europe and for communal rather than external effect. This connection becomes even more compelling when we consider the specific placement of these cathedrals. Just as obelisks were erected on powerful earth energy nodes or ley line intersections, the great Gothic cathedrals were often built directly atop pre-existing pagan sacred sites. Chartres Cathedral, for example, is renowned for its powerful energy and sits on a site that was previously a Druid grove, which itself was built over a sacred spring. The Templars and the Masonic guilds they patronized appear to have possessed the knowledge to identify these potent locations, understanding that the ground itself was already charged. By constructing their geometrically perfect buildings on these nodes, they were effectively capping the wellspring of terrestrial energy, just as an obelisk does, and then using the architecture to refine and focus that raw earthly power, combining it with the celestial energy drawn down through the spires. This creates a complete circuit, a sacred technology that unites the power of the earth with the power of the sky, all within a space designed to transform human consciousness. The tragic end of the Templar Order only deepens the mystery. In 1307, King Philip IV of France, in collusion with Pope Clement V, moved to destroy the Templars, arresting their members on Friday, October 13th, a day that would forever live in infamy. The charges against them were a mix of heresy, blasphemy, and secret rituals, all of which were almost certainly fabricated for political and financial reasons. Yet within the sensational accusations there are curious hints. Some confessions, extracted under torture, spoke of the knights worshipping a mysterious head known as Baphomet. While often portrayed as a demonic idol, some esoteric scholars interpret Baphomet not as a deity, but as a symbol of gnosis or hidden knowledge. This head could represent the captured and synthesized wisdom of the ancient world, the very secrets of sacred geometry and energetic science they had uncovered in the Holy Land. Their true crime, in the eyes of the Church and the Crown, may not have been heresy but possession. They held a knowledge so powerful that it threatened the very foundations of established authority, a knowledge that could create enlightened individuals and societies independent of papal or royal control. The sudden dissolution of the order did not mean the knowledge died with it. Legends persist that before the arrests, warning was given, and a fleet of Templar ships laden with their treasure and their archives escaped from the port of La Rochelle, vanishing into the fog of history. Some believe this cargo included the physical evidence of their discoveries, perhaps even the lost scrolls that detailed the true function of the obelisk. This hidden archive is said to have been transported to Scotland, Switzerland, and even across the Atlantic, preserved by successor organizations that would eventually emerge as the Freemasons. The architectural and esoteric principles the Templars had championed did not disappear. They went underground, carefully preserved within the symbols, rituals, and building practices of the Masonic guilds. The sudden, brilliant flourishing of the Renaissance, with its rediscovery of classical proportion and human potential, may not have been a coincidence, but a direct result of this guarded knowledge slowly seeping back into the European mainstream, allowing the secret of the obelisk to live on, not in the deserts of Egypt, but in the soaring stone and light of the great cathedrals, a silent testament to a brotherhood that may have been the last true guardians of an ancient power. This profound connection between the Templars' rediscovered wisdom and the physical form of the obelisk finds its ultimate philosophical expression in a single, cryptic phrase that echoed through the libraries of medieval Europe, as above, so below. This is the cornerstone of the Hermetic tradition, a body of esoteric knowledge attributed to the mythical sage Hermes Trismegistus, who was seen by medieval scholars as a fusion of the Egyptian god Thoth and the Greek messenger god Hermes. This principle declares a fundamental correspondence between the macrocosm of the universe and the microcosm of the earthly realm. The celestial and the terrestrial are not separate worlds, they are mirrors, reflecting each other in an infinite dance of symmetry and influence. And when we hold this lens up to the silent, towering form of the obelisk, we see it for what it truly is, the ultimate architectural embodiment of this universal law. The obelisk is not merely a stone object, it is a metaphysical bridge, its base firmly planted in the below of the material earth, its pyramidion aimed precisely at the above of the celestial sphere, physically demonstrating that the path to cosmic power runs directly through the heart of our world. This concept was not an abstract philosophy for the initiated. It was a practical guide to manipulating reality, and its most potent distillation is found in the legendary Emerald Tablet, a short, enigmatic text that was studied with feverish intensity by alchemists and sages throughout the Middle Ages. Believed to have been discovered in a hidden vault by Alexander the Great, the tablet was said to be made of a single, flawless emerald, and its words were inscribed by Hermes himself. Its opening lines are perhaps the most famous in all of Western esotericism. That which is above is like to that which is below, and that which is below is like to that which is above, for the performance of the miracles of the one thing. This one thing is the primordial substance, the unified field from which all of creation manifests. The miracles are the acts of transformation and power that become possible when one learns to work with this singular essence. When you look at an obelisk, you are looking at a monument built to perform exactly this miracle. Its singular, unbroken shaft of granite is a perfect representation of the one thing, a single, unified substance extracted from the earth and raised toward the heavens to facilitate the great work of connection and transmutation. The process described in the Emerald Tablet is a blueprint for alchemical transformation, and it maps with stunning precision onto the form and function of the obelisk. The text speaks of a process of ascending from the earth to heaven and again descending to the earth, combining the powers of the upper and the lower. This is not a metaphor for spiritual enlightenment alone. It is a technical description of an energetic circuit. The obelisk is the physical apparatus for this very operation. Its foundation draws up the telluric, earthy energies, the power of the below. Its pyramidion, especially when sheathed in electrum, receives and draws down the celestial, solar energies, the power of the above. The monolithic shaft is the conduit where these two forces meet and combine, creating a unified field of power, the one thing made manifest in a localized, controllable form. The medieval alchemist, working in his small laboratory with his alembic and furnace, was attempting to replicate on a small scale what the Egyptian priests had achieved on a colossal, architectural scale with the obelisk. The stone needle was a permanent, stabilized alchemical laboratory, perpetually performing the great work of uniting heaven and earth. The symbolic language of the obelisk's very components reinforces this hermetic interpretation. The square or rectangular base, firmly anchored, represents the stable material world, the four classical elements, and the realm of the below. The tapering shaft represents the process of refinement and ascent, moving from the gross material toward the subtle and spiritual. The pyramidion, a miniature pyramid, is the point of singularity, the culmination where all forces converge before being projected outward or channeled downward. This entire structure is a three-dimensional diagram of the alchemical process of solve et coagula, to dissolve and to coagulate. The earthly energies are dissolved as they rise, purified and spiritualized by their ascent. At the apex, they are infused with the celestial fire and then coagulated back into a new, refined substance as they descend, now carrying the imprint of both worlds, ready to sanctify the land and enlighten the people. For the medieval mind, this made the obelisk the most profound textbook ever carved. It was a silent, permanent teacher of the hermetic arts, standing in plain sight for all to see, yet its true lesson was accessible only to those who possessed the key of the emerald tablet. A scholar like the Dominican monk Albertus Magnus, who studied both Aristotle and Hermetic texts, would have looked upon a drawing or description of an Egyptian obelisk and immediately recognized its geometry as a representation of the cosmic chain of being. A Renaissance magus like Marsilio Ficino, who translated the Hermetic texts for his Medici patron, would have understood the obelisk not as a pagan idol to be destroyed, but as a revered artifact of the Prisca Theologia, the ancient, pure theology that predated and foreshadowed Christianity. This perspective explains the otherwise baffling actions of the Church in raising obelisks in Rome. They were not conquering paganism so much as they were reclaiming and rebaptizing a pre-Christian Hermetic technology, attempting to plug its cosmic power into the new spiritual grid of Christendom. Ultimately, the Hermetic principle reveals the obelisk's purpose as a great unifier. It was designed to heal the perceived rift between the spiritual and the material, to demonstrate that the divine is not separate from creation but is immanent within it, accessible through the correct application of natural law. The miracles of the one thing that the emerald tablet promises, whether they were manifested as enhanced agricultural fertility, profound healing, heightened states of consciousness among the priesthood, or the sheer stability and longevity of the civilization itself, were the observable results of this successful unification. The obelisk was the tool that maintained this sacred connection, a constant stone reminder that humanity's role is not to escape the world, but to become the conscious link that binds the earth to the stars, fulfilling the Hermetic mandate to actively participate in the divine work of cosmic harmony. This understanding elevates the obelisk from a mysterious relic to the central component in a sophisticated worldview, where architecture, philosophy, and spirituality merged into a single, powerful science of life. Now, let's turn our gaze from the soaring stones themselves to the parchment and ink of the medieval cartographers, where this hidden geography of power was perhaps most deliberately preserved. Imagine unrolling a vast, beautifully illuminated map like the famous Hereford Mappa Mundi, created around the year 1300. To the modern eye, it looks like a fantastical collage, a circular world filled with biblical scenes, mythical beasts, and cities drawn as miniature walled castles. Jerusalem sits triumphantly at the very center, depicted not with realistic buildings, but often with a distinct, towering structure piercing its skyline. Rome, too, is marked by a similar prominence. For centuries, scholars have interpreted these illustrations as simple artistic conventions, the medieval equivalent of using a tiny drawing of a castle to represent any city on a map. But what if we're reading these maps with the wrong set of eyes? What if these tower-like features were not generic symbols, but specific, coded markers for the most potent energetic nodes on Earth, with the obelisk, the ultimate power spire, conceptually at their heart? This reinterpretation transforms these maps from geographical guides into spiritual and energetic circuit diagrams. The medieval worldview, deeply influenced by the Platonic and Hermetic idea of a living, ensouled earth, did not separate physical geography from spiritual significance. A place was important not just because of its political power or population, but because of its perceived connection to the divine. The Mappa Mundi and others like it was not intended for navigating the high seas or finding the quickest route between towns. It was a moralized map, a visual representation of Christian history and salvation. Its central placement of Jerusalem was a theological statement. It was the navel of the world, the site of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, and therefore the ultimate spiritual epicenter. By depicting it with a towering form, the mapmakers were signaling its supreme status within this invisible network. They were saying, here is the most powerful transformer, the primary connection point between heaven and earth. But the map's genius lies in its inclusion of other secondary nodes. Rome, with its own prominent tower, represents another major anchor point in this network, the center of ecclesiastical power. Other cities and sacred sites are shown in a hierarchy that reflects their perceived spiritual charge. This was not merely a matter of religious dogma. It was a cartography of consciousness, charting a landscape where travel was as much a spiritual pilgrimage as a physical one. An initiate, a knight, or a monk studying such a map would understand that a journey from, say, London to Jerusalem was not just a long walk. It was a process of moving from a lower energy periphery toward the highest energy center, a transformative passage that would recalibrate the traveler's very soul by bringing them into proximity with these amplified locations. The map was their guide to navigating this terrain of invisible force. This concept of a hierarchical network finds a stunning parallel in the design of the great rose windows of Gothic cathedrals, which began to appear around the same time these maps were being drawn. A rose window is a complex circular design with a central point from which all other elements radiate. The Hereford Mappa Mundi is essentially a rose window drawn on parchment. Jerusalem is the central hub, and the paths to other sacred sites are like the radiating spokes, all interconnected within the great wheel of Christendom. This was the master blueprint, the physical obelisks and later the cathedral spires that echoed their form were the three-dimensional installations built upon this blueprint. The map was the plan, and the stone towers were the functional hardware placed at the coordinates specified by that plan. So who were the people using these maps as guides to this hidden landscape? They were the very inheritors of the esoteric traditions we have been discussing, the learned clergy, the military orders like the Templars, and the early humanist scholars of the rising universities. These individuals were often initiates into a world of knowledge that blended orthodox Christian theology with Neoplatonic philosophy and fragments of older Hermetic science. For them, the Mappa Mundi's illustrations were a form of discreet communication. In an age where unorthodox beliefs could lead to charges of heresy, this symbolic language was a safe way to preserve and transmit the idea of a powered earth. A towering symbol over Jerusalem could be explained away as an artistic flourish to any inquiring church authority, but to another initiate, it clearly signaled the location of a supreme energetic hotspot, a place where the veil between worlds was thin and the potential for spiritual contact and power was immense. The practical application of this knowledge was profound. Consider the phenomenon of the pilgrimage, one of the defining features of medieval life. Millions of people embarked on these arduous journeys, driven by faith and the promise of spiritual merit. But from the perspective of this hidden geography, pilgrimage takes on an additional, more technical dimension. The established pilgrimage routes, the way of St. James to Santiago de Compostela, the Via Francigena to Rome, were not random paths. They very likely followed pre-existing ley lines or telluric energy currents, connecting one secondary power node to another, ultimately leading to a primary center like Jerusalem or Rome. The cathedrals and major churches built along these routes, often at a day's walking distance from one another, were not just convenient rest stops. They were strategically placed substations built on local energy vortices to refresh and amplify the pilgrims' own spiritual energy as they traveled, maintaining the current all the way to their destination. The pilgrimage was, in effect, a walking meditation across a live wire of terrestrial power, designed to produce a transformative energetic effect upon the traveler who completed the circuit. This also sheds light on the medieval obsession with relics. The bones of a saint or a fragment of the true cross were not merely holy souvenirs. In the esoteric worldview, these objects were believed to act as condensers or batteries of spiritual energy, much like the quartz in an obelisk. Placing a powerful relic in a church built on a potent energy node would, in theory, supercharge that location, turning it into a more effective transformer. The maps, then, can be seen as guides to this entire ecosystem, showing not only the power nodes themselves but implicitly charting the routes between them and the repositories of sacred objects that amplified their effect. It was a complete system for spiritual navigation and energetic development, disguised as a simple map of the world. When we overlay this medieval cognitive map with the actual, physical distribution of obelisks and major sacred sites, the correlation is striking. The path from the Egyptian power centers at Heliopolis and Thebes to the relocated nodes in Rome and Constantinople, and then to the great cathedral sites of medieval Europe, traces a clear westward migration of this concept. The initiates who created the Mappa Mundi were, in a sense, documenting the final stage of this migration. They were acknowledging that while the physical obelisks of Egypt had been moved, the underlying network of power remained, and new anchors, the cathedrals, had been constructed upon it. Their map was a declaration that the spiritual center of this network had now formally shifted to Jerusalem and Rome within the Christian worldview, but it was still operating on the same ancient principles first mastered by the builders of the obelisk. These parchment charts are therefore the missing link, the symbolic key that connects the stone giants of the desert to the soaring spires of the Gothic cathedral, revealing a continuous, hidden tradition of mapping and utilizing the Earth's subtle energies for a single, grand purpose: to elevate humanity by connecting it to the divine. Yet, for all the intellectual fervor of the Renaissance, this knowledge remained largely theoretical until a determined and pragmatic pope decided to physically rewrite the skyline of Rome itself. Pope Sixtus V, who reigned from 1585 to 1590, was a man of immense energy and a vision that was equal parts spiritual, political, and esoteric. He looked upon the city, still scarred by the sack of Rome decades earlier and littered with the broken remains of its imperial past, and saw not ruins but dormant potential. His grand urban plan was to transform Rome from a medieval warren into a magnificent, orderly Christian capital, a new Jerusalem, and at the heart of this vision were the fallen obelisks. For Sixtus, these were not pagan embarrassments to be hidden, but divine instruments to be reclaimed and reactivated. His campaign to raise them was the most ambitious engineering project since the fall of the Roman Empire, and it was driven by a conviction that went far beyond simple urban beautification. He believed that by repositioning these ancient spires at key points throughout the city, he could channel divine grace and spiritual authority directly into the heart of Christendom, creating a powered network that would solidify papal power for centuries to come. The sheer audacity of this endeavor cannot be overstated. The technology to lift and move 300-ton monoliths had been lost for over a millennium. The task fell to Sixtus's brilliant and courageous engineer, Domenico Fontana, who approached each operation with the meticulous precision of a military campaign. The raising of the Vatican obelisk in 1586 was a city-wide event, a spectacle of faith and engineering that held all of Rome in suspense. Fontana's detailed account describes a scene of almost unbearable tension. A small army of 900 men, 140 horses, and 46 capstans were deployed. The workers were sworn to silence on pain of death to prevent any misheard command that could send the granite giant crashing to the ground. As the immense wooden towers and a labyrinth of ropes began to take the strain, the crowd held its breath. At the pivotal moment, as the obelisk was lifted from its ancient base, a signal was given and a cross was raised high atop the stone. This was not an afterthought, it was the climax of the ritual. The act was a public exorcism and a baptism, a symbolic and spiritual reboot of the device, purging its pagan past and reprogramming it for a new Christian purpose. The successful erection was hailed as a miracle, but it was a miracle born of recovered knowledge and unshakable belief in the object's inherent power. This belief was rooted in the intellectual currents swirling through the Vatican itself. Sixtus V was a contemporary of and patron to some of the leading Hermetic thinkers of his day. The Vatican Library was at that very time one of the primary centers for the study of the newly rediscovered Hermetic texts, those very writings that proclaimed the principle of as above, so below. For the Pope and his advisors, the obelisk was the ultimate physical manifestation of this law. Its re-erection was a deliberate act of high magic, a geomancy on a grand scale. Each location was chosen with profound symbolic and energetic intent. The obelisk was raised at Santa Maria Maggiore, St. John Lateran, and St. Peter's Square, creating a perfect triangle of power across the city. These were not arbitrary church sites, they were the most important papal basilicas, the spiritual pillars of the church. By placing an obelisk at each, Sixtus was driving energetic anchors into the most potent nodes of Roman Christianity, creating a circuit that would, in theory, amplify and stabilize the spiritual authority of the papacy itself. This network served a dual purpose, reflecting the two faces of Renaissance power, enlightened aspiration and absolute control. On one hand, the reactivated grid was intended to usher in a new golden age, a Christian Renaissance where divine wisdom and harmony would flow through the city, inspiring artists, scholars, and the faithful alike. It was an attempt to create a utopian state, a physical Rome that mirrored the heavenly Jerusalem. Yet, on the other hand, this was also a technology of social and spiritual control. The obelisks functioned as permanent, silent preachers, their very presence a constant reminder of the Church's triumphant authority. By dominating the major squares and the termini of new, straight thoroughfares that Sixtus built, they became focal points for civic life, subtly shaping the consciousness of the populace. The energy they were believed to emit was not just for enlightenment, it was also a force for order, docility, and conformity, ensuring that the city's vibrant, often chaotic, energy was directed and contained within the structures of the Church. The legacy of Sixtus V's obsession is written indelibly on the map of modern Rome. The obelisks he raised still stand exactly where he placed them, not as mute relics of a forgotten past, but as active components of the city's identity. His work represents the culmination of the medieval mystery and the dawn of its modern incarnation. He proved that the powerful of Europe still believed in the tangible force of these stones, and he provided the blueprint for every ruler who would follow. The popes, emperors, and generals who came after him looked to his success and understood that to possess an obelisk was to claim a lineage to both ancient Egypt and imperial Rome. But more importantly, it was to wield a tool that could focus the invisible forces of history, faith, and power. The Renaissance revival was not the end of the story. It was the moment the secret stepped fully back into the light, setting the stage for the next great act in this drama, as the obelisks began their journey across the ocean to the new centers of a burgeoning global power. Now we enter the most speculative and electrifying chapter of our mystery, a theory that bridges the chasm between ancient stone and modern science with a truly shocking proposition. Forget for a moment the familiar narratives of solar worship and spiritual symbols. Imagine instead that the Egyptian obelisk was a piece of sophisticated electrical hardware, a component in a prehistoric power grid designed to harvest atmospheric electricity and wirelessly distribute it across the land. This idea, championed by a number of modern independent researchers, suggests that the civilization along the Nile was not just spiritually advanced, but technologically so, possessing a mastery over natural forces that we would only begin to rediscover with the work of inventors like Nikola Tesla thousands of years later. At its core, this theory reimagines the obelisk as something utterly familiar to electrical engineers, a giant stone dielectric capacitor. To understand this, picture a simple capacitor you might find in any electronic device. It's a component that stores electrical energy, typically made of two conductive plates separated by an insulating material known as a dielectric. Now, let's scale this concept up to a monumental size. In the obelisk, we find all the necessary parts. The gleaming, electrum-sheathed pyramidion acts as one conductive plate, positioned at the highest possible point to interact with the electrically charged upper atmosphere. The body of the obelisk itself, that massive shaft of granite, is the dielectric. Granite, being rich in quartz crystals, is an excellent insulator, perfectly suited to separate electrical charges. Finally, the entire structure is grounded, its base firmly planted deep into the earth, which acts as the second massive conductive plate. This creates a colossal, naturally occurring capacitor, constantly building up a potential difference of voltage between the charged air above and the neutral ground below. Under the right conditions, such as before a thunderstorm when the atmospheric charge is immense, this voltage could have become tremendous, potentially resulting in a visible, awe-inspiring corona discharge, a silent, shimmering glow of St. Elmo's fire around the pyramidion, a phenomenon that would have been interpreted as the god Ra himself manifesting in fiery glory upon his monument. This startlingly modern idea finds eerie echoes in fragmentary medieval accounts that have long been dismissed as mere fantasy. Across Europe, there were persistent legends of perpetual lamps found in sealed ancient tombs and crypts, lights that burned for centuries without any apparent fuel. While these are often explained away as clever frauds or the misidentification of phosphorescent minerals, what if they were a garbled cultural memory of a different kind of light? If an obelisk-based power grid did exist, it's conceivable that this harvested atmospheric electricity could have been used to power devices within temples or the tombs of the most revered pharaohs. Using principles of electromagnetic induction, the same principle that allows for wireless phone charging today, energy could have been transferred from the resonating obelisk to specially tuned receivers inside nearby structures. A lamp designed with a coiled conductor and a suitable gas or filament could, in theory, glow indefinitely as long as the obelisk outside continued to hum with power. The medieval chroniclers who recorded these tales, lacking the vocabulary of electrical engineering, could only describe what they heard as magical, eternal flames, the technological reality behind them having been lost for ages. Furthermore, ancient texts and later folklore from various cultures speak of mysterious fires or unquenchable light seen atop sacred mountains and the highest points of temples. The famed lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the Seven Wonders, was said to have possessed a massive, powerful flame that could be seen for dozens of miles out to sea. The official explanation is a massive bonfire, but the logistics of maintaining such a blaze in an exposed, sea-sprayed tower are daunting. An alternative, albeit highly speculative, possibility is that it utilized a form of arc lighting powered by the same atmospheric energy system. A sufficiently powerful electrical potential channeled to the lighthouse's apex could have sustained a brilliant electric arc between two carbon rods, a light far more intense and reliable than any fire. For the medieval mind, such a blazing, sun-like light emanating from a stone tower would have seemed nothing short of miraculous, a fragment of a lost golden age when the gods or their human representatives could command the very lightning to illuminate the night. These scattered legends, when viewed through the lens of the electrical obelisk theory, transform from fairy tales into potential historical reports, documenting the last flickering glimpses of a technology that the world had forgotten. The implications of this are quite literally earth-shattering. It suggests that the primary purpose of the obelisk's precise placement, its sacred geometry, and its resonant granite construction was not merely spiritual but intensely practical. The network of obelisks, strategically positioned across Egypt and potentially connected via underground conductive channels or simply by resonating at the same frequency, could have formed a wireless power grid, much like Tesla's dream of a world energized by standing waves. This would explain the sheer, obsessive effort behind their construction and placement. You don't move 500-ton blocks of stone for a simple symbol. You do it to build the critical infrastructure for your entire civilization. This system could have provided more than just light. The subtle electrical field generated around an active obelisk could have had tangible effects, from stimulating plant growth in sacred gardens to purifying water through electrolysis, or even creating an environment that fostered health and vitality, all of which would have been perceived as the blessings of the gods flowing from their stone representatives. In this radical reinterpretation, the Egyptian priesthood were not just mystics, but the chief engineers of a power utility, maintaining a technology that seamlessly blended the boundaries between the physical and the divine, a lost science where faith and function were one and the same. But perhaps the most intimate and personally transformative theory of all suggests that the true purpose of these stone giants was to act as a psychic amplifier, a device engineered not for the land or the sky, but for the human mind and spirit itself. This perspective shifts the focus from external energy grids to internal transformation, proposing that the obelisk's ultimate function was to elevate human consciousness, to unlock latent psychic faculties, and to serve as a gateway for direct, unmediated spiritual experience. In this view, the obelisk was not just a monument to the gods, but a working tool for a human being to become godlike, if only for a moment, by achieving a state of transcendent awareness known in many esoteric traditions as gnosis. This concept finds powerful support in the persistent accounts from mystics, sensitives, and modern intuitives who have reported profound personal experiences in the presence of these structures. These are not stories of historical record, but of subjective, internal revelation. Individuals describe a palpable shift in the atmosphere, a tingling sensation on the skin, or a sudden quieting of the internal monologue. Some report spontaneous visions, flashes of insight into personal dilemmas, or a deep, empathic connection to the people and events that have surrounded the stone for centuries. Others speak of unexpected emotional releases or a surge of healing energy that seems to dissolve physical pain or chronic anxiety. While skeptics dismiss these as placebo effects or imaginative suggestibility within the framework of our mystery, they are considered valid data points. They are interpreted as the human nervous system responding to the obelisk's unique energy signature, a resonance that acts like a tuning fork for the soul, bringing its subtle frequencies into a higher, more perceptive alignment. This idea of the obelisk as a catalyst for gnosis was the ultimate goal of many medieval esoteric traditions that secretly venerated these structures. Groups like the alchemists, the Rosicrucians, and certain strands of Christian mysticism were not primarily interested in political power or material wealth. Their quest was for direct, experiential knowledge of the divine, a state of being where the seeker moves beyond mere belief and into a state of luminous certainty and unity with creation. This state of gnosis was seen as the pinnacle of human potential. The arduous spiritual practices, the complex symbols, and the guarded rituals of these traditions were all designed to achieve this one goal. The medieval adepts who studied the legacy of Egypt came to believe that the obelisk was a pre-built, supremely efficient machine for accomplishing this very thing. It was a technology of transcendence, offering a shortcut to enlightenment by creating a stable, powerfully charged environment where the veil between the human and the divine was worn thin. To understand how this might work, we can look at the obelisk's form as a blueprint for consciousness. Its grounded base represents the rooted physical self and the subconscious mind. The long, ascending shaft symbolizes the journey of awareness upward through the layers of the psyche, refining and purifying intention as it rises. Finally, the pyramidion represents the pinnacle of consciousness, the awakened, illumined mind, the point of singularity where individual awareness merges with the infinite. A seeker standing before an obelisk or using it as a focal point for meditation was essentially performing an internal ritual that mirrored the external structure. They were grounding their own energy, drawing it up through their spiritual centers, and aiming for a point of transcendent focus at the crown of their own being. The obelisk, resonating with its own sacred geometry and piezoelectric charge, would amplify this internal process, acting as a spiritual amplifier that boosted the signal of the seeker's own intention and devotion. This transforms many historical and religious practices from vague rituals into precise technological operations. The Egyptian priests performing ceremonies at the base of an obelisk were not just chanting prayers to a distant deity. They were, in effect, using sound and focused intention to interface with the device, tuning its output to facilitate a collective mystical experience. The process of initiation in the mystery schools, which often involved long periods of isolation and sensory deprivation near sacred sites, can be seen as a deliberate immersion in this amplified energy field to accelerate spiritual awakening. Even the medieval pilgrimage, that long, arduous walk to a sacred site marked by a towering spire, takes on a new dimension. The journey itself was a purification, and the final approach to the obelisk or cathedral was the moment of plugging into the source, a culmination designed to trigger a permanent shift in the pilgrim's consciousness. The obelisk was the fixed point in the landscape that offered not just a symbolic hope of heaven, but a tangible, energetic gateway to it. This interpretation ultimately presents the Egyptian obelisk as the most profound and personal of all the ancient mysteries. It suggests that the greatest power these structures wielded was not over empires or energy fields, but over the inner landscape of the human soul. They were public utilities for the spirit, offering anyone with the sensitivity and the intention a chance to touch the infinite. This is why their secret was so fiercely guarded and so passionately sought after by mystics through the ages. It was not a secret of control, but a secret of liberation. The true treasure of the obelisk was not gold or geopolitical advantage, but the potential for any individual to access heightened states of intuition, healing, and direct spiritual knowledge. In the end, the most compelling mystery is not how they were built or why they were moved, but what they can still awaken within us today. A lingering invitation to explore the furthest reaches of our own consciousness, using these ancient stone guides as beacons on the path to our own untapped potential. This global fascination with the towering stone needle forces us to confront a startling reality. The obelisk is not an isolated Egyptian invention. While the polished granite monoliths of the Nile are the most iconic, the same fundamental form appears with uncanny consistency across the ancient world, carved by cultures separated by vast oceans and thousands of years. In the highlands of Ethiopia, the ancient kingdom of Aksum raised enormous, intricately carved stelae that are functionally identical to obelisks' monolithic stone spires, some reaching over 100 feet tall, featuring a distinct pyramidal capstone. Across Europe, from the windswept plains of Karnak in Brittany to the rolling hills of England, our Neolithic ancestors erected menhirs and standing stones, many of which share the same towering, tapering profile. Even in the Americas, certain Mesoamerican structures and the mysterious, tall, slender stones found at sites like Tiwanaku in Bolivia echo this universal shape. This pattern is too widespread and too specific to be a coincidence. It suggests that the power of the obelisk form was not discovered by one culture and then copied, but was independently recognized and utilized by disparate civilizations as a fundamental piece of technological or spiritual architecture. What could possibly explain this universal recurrence? One compelling theory is that we are looking at the scattered legacy of a single, highly advanced precursor civilization, a culture so ancient that its name has been lost to the great amnesia of time, often referred to in legend as Atlantis or another forgotten golden age. Proponents of this view argue that a global cataclysm, such as a great flood or a dramatic shift in the Earth's climate, shattered this unified world culture, scattering its survivors to the far corners of the globe. These refugees, carrying fragments of their ancestral knowledge, would have sought to rebuild, and what would be one of the first and most crucial structures they would erect. The obelisk, a powerful device for harnessing Earth energies, stabilizing the environment, and re-establishing a connection to the cosmos. This would explain why the Axumites in Africa, the megalithic builders in Europe, and early cultures in the Americas, all with no known historical contact, instinctively returned to the same form. They were not inventing it anew, they were desperately trying to reconstruct a vital piece of their lost technological heritage, a universal tool for survival and spiritual realignment in a post-cataclysmic world. Yet another perspective, equally profound, argues that we need not invoke a lost continent to explain this phenomenon. This view posits that the obelisk shape is a fundamental archetype, a primal form hardwired into the human psyche and the very fabric of the natural world. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung wrote extensively about archetypes, universal, symbolic patterns that reside in the collective unconscious of all humanity. The image of a world axis, a towering pillar connecting heaven and earth, is one of the most powerful and recurring of these archetypes, appearing in myths and dreams across all cultures as the axis mundi. The obelisk is the ultimate physical manifestation of this inner image. It is a symbol of order rising from chaos, of the individual's aspiration to reach toward the divine, and of the connection between the material and spiritual realms. When a culture reaches a certain level of spiritual sophistication, it may naturally feel compelled to give this powerful inner image an external, physical form, resulting in the independent creation of obelisks, menhirs, and stelae across the globe. Perhaps the most compelling synthesis of these ideas lies in the concept of a shared human sensitivity to the natural world. Our distant ancestors lived in a much more intimate relationship with the earth. They were attuned to its subtle rhythms and energies in a way that our modern, technology-saturated consciousness has largely forgotten. It is possible that early humans, through methods like dowsing or simply through an innate, visceral feeling, could detect the powerful energy currents that flow through the earth, the same ley lines we discussed earlier. They would have recognized specific locations where this energy was particularly strong, spots that felt inherently sacred, charged, and alive. And through intuition or experimentation, they discovered that erecting a tall, tapering stone spire at these locations would act to stabilize, amplify, and focus this raw terrestrial power. The shape itself, with its wide base anchoring it to the earth and its narrow apex aiming for the sky, was found to be the most efficient geometric form for this purpose. This was not a technology passed down in books, but a natural science rediscovered again and again by cultures who remained close to the land, a universal solution to the universal problem of how to interface with the living energy of the planet. This global pattern fundamentally transforms the mystery of the obelisk. It is no longer just an Egyptian enigma or a Roman obsession. It becomes a human story, a thread that connects the deepest spiritual and technological aspirations of our species across time and space. The recurring form of the obelisk stands as a silent, stone testament to a time when humanity, in all its diversity, shared a common understanding of the world. A world that was alive with invisible forces, a world where the sacred could be physically located and actively engaged with through the perfect marriage of geometry and intention. Whether the legacy of a lost civilization or the spontaneous emergence of a powerful archetype, these stones remind us that our ancestors were not primitive. They were pioneers of a different kind of science, one that sought not to conquer nature but to commune with it, and in doing so, they left behind a global signature of their quest, written not in ink but in enduring stone. And so we arrive at the final, fascinating contradiction of our story, here in the 21st century. We live in an age of silicon and steel, of quantum physics and digital networks, a world that has supposedly demystified the universe. Yet, the obelisk has not faded into the dusty pages of history. It is more present than ever, not as a relic to be studied behind museum glass, but as a living form that we continue to replicate on a colossal scale. The most undeniable proof of this is the skyline of Washington, D.C., dominated by the Washington Monument. When this towering structure was completed in 1884, it was the tallest building in the world at the time, a stark, unadorned marble obelisk dedicated to a modern founding father. On the surface, its form was chosen as a classical allusion to ancient greatness, a way to connect the young American Republic to the enduring ideals of Egypt and Rome. But why this specific form? Why not a grand pyramid, a rotunda, or a colossal statue? The choice feels instinctive, almost primal. It suggests that when a new nation sought a symbol for its power, its resilience, and its aspiration, it unconsciously reached for the same blueprint that has captivated empires for 5,000 years. We are still building them because on some deep, subconscious level, we still believe in what they represent and perhaps in what they can do. This instinct is not confined to national monuments. It pulses through the veins of our modern mythology, the stories we tell ourselves in films, books, and video games. Think of the imposing monolith in the film 2001, A Space Odyssey, a silent, black obelisk that appears at pivotal moments in human evolution, guiding our development from apes to star children. It is not a friendly symbol, it is enigmatic, powerful, and utterly compelling. In video games like the Assassin's Creed series, obelisks are frequently depicted as fragments of a precursor civilization, containing advanced knowledge or acting as keys to a global network of power. These are not casual artistic choices. Our storytellers, the modern shamans of our culture, consistently return to the obelisk as a visual shorthand for ancient, mysterious power, for a technology that is both awe-inspiring and slightly terrifying. We don't depict these structures as simple decorative pillars. We code them as active, functional devices, repositories of secrets that our characters must unlock. This repeated narrative trope is a powerful form of cultural memory. It is as if we collectively know that these stones are more than they seem, and our fiction becomes the arena where we safely explore that haunting intuition. So what is the source of this enduring pull? Why does this specific shape continue to resonate so deeply within the human psyche? From a psychological perspective, the obelisk is a phenomenally potent archetype. It is the ultimate symbol of the axis mundi, the world axis that connects Earth to heaven. It represents order emerging from chaos, a single, unwavering line of purpose in a complicated world. Its sheer verticality is an expression of aspiration, of humanity's eternal desire to reach beyond our limitations, to touch the divine, to achieve the impossible. In a modern context, it becomes a symbol of technological and spiritual ambition. When we look at a skyscraper, itself a glass and steel obelisk, we see the same aspiration, a reaching for the sky, a declaration of human achievement. The obelisk form taps into something pre-verbal and profound within us, a longing for connection, for meaning, and for a tangible anchor in a universe that can often feel vast and indifferent. We are drawn to them for the same reason we are drawn to mountain peaks and towering trees. They give us a physical reference point for our own innate desire to rise, to grow, to transcend. This leads to the most provocative question of all. In our relentless modern replication of the obelisk, are we unknowingly replicating the ancient technology as well? Consider the materials. The Washington Monument, while faced in marble, has an interior structure that includes iron supports, effectively creating a massive, if rudimentary electrical conductor anchored deep into the ground. Modern skyscrapers are riddled with copper wiring and steel rebar, all of which could, in theory, interact with atmospheric electricity in ways that mirror the proposed functions of their granite ancestors. Their placement is also far from random. They are often located at the symbolic and sometimes geographical center of power, on the National Mall in Washington, in the financial districts of global cities, acting as the central markers of our modern world. Could it be that we are still building energetic circuit boards for our civilization, guided by an instinct we no longer possess the conscious knowledge to articulate? Are our monuments and our tallest buildings still functioning as subtle energy conduits, influencing the mood, ambition, and even the collective consciousness of the populations that live in their shadows, all while we remain blissfully unaware of the ancient science we are inadvertently practicing? Perhaps the true power of the obelisk, then, is its stubborn refusal to be merely historical. It is a form that refuses to die because it speaks to a part of us that rational modernity has not been able to silence. It stands at the intersection of our past and our future, a stone question mark challenging our assumptions about progress. We have mapped the human genome and peered to the edge of the observable universe, yet we still raise these monolithic needles to the sky just as our ancestors did. This is not an accident. It is evidence of a continuity, a thread of intuition that connects the pharaoh's architect to the civic planner, the medieval mystic to the science fiction writer. The obelisk endures because it represents a mystery we have not yet fully solved, a technology we have not yet fully relearned, and a potential within ourselves we have not yet fully actualized. It is a silent, permanent invitation to look deeper, to remember that the world is stranger and more wonderful than our textbooks allow, and that the most profound secrets are sometimes hidden in the most monumental of plain sights. And so our journey through the sands of time brings us to a final, profound crossroads of interpretation. We have ventured together from the sun-scorched quarries of Aswan to the sacred geometry of the pyramidion, from the resonant hum of piezoelectric granite to the strategic placements on a global energy grid. We have seen these stone giants through the lenses of Roman emperors and Renaissance popes, through the secretive knowledge of the Knights Templar and the ambitious dreams of Napoleon. We have considered them as celestial antennas drawing down cosmic power, as alchemical engines performing the great work of transmutation, and as sophisticated capacitors in a prehistoric power grid. We have confronted their shadow side, the chilling possibility that their power to elevate consciousness could be inverted into a tool for mass psychological control, a silent technology of domination passed down through the corridors of power. And we have felt their most intimate potential as psychic amplifiers offering a gateway to personal transcendence and gnosis. This tapestry of theories woven from threads of archaeology, esoteric tradition, and cutting-edge science presents not a single truth but a spectrum of incredible possibilities. The obelisk refuses to be pinned down to one simple function, and that is the very source of its enduring mystique. It is a mirror reflecting back whatever question we dare to ask of it, be it technological, spiritual, or political. At its core, the greatest power of the obelisk may not be in any specific energy it once generated, but in the boundless wonder it continues to provoke in us today. These are not inert relics of a dead civilization. They are active participants in an ongoing dialogue between the past and the present. Every time a modern engineer scratches their head at the logistics of their erection, every time a sensitive individual reports a strange feeling in their presence, every time a historian uncovers a new document about their translocation, the mystery deepens. They force us to question the linear narrative of human progress. They challenge our arrogant assumption that our modern technology represents the pinnacle of achievement. They whisper of a different kind of science, one that did not separate the spiritual from the physical, one that saw the universe as a living, interconnected whole and sought to build in harmony with its fundamental laws. The obelisk stands as a permanent question mark against our understanding of the ancient world, a silent challenge that dares us to think bigger, to look deeper, and to remember that the past may hold secrets we have not yet even learned how to seek. This legacy is not confined to the distant deserts of Egypt or the piazzas of Rome. It is all around us, etched into the very skyline of our modern world. The Washington Monument, the spires of our great cathedrals, the sleek glass towers of our financial districts, they are all children of the obelisk, echoing its form and perhaps unconsciously its function. We are still building these symbolic anchors, still reaching for the sky in a gesture of aspiration and power. The form persists because the human impulses that created it, the desire to connect with the divine, to mark our place in the cosmos, to harness the forces of nature, and to project our authority, are as alive today as they were 5,000 years ago. We have simply changed the vocabulary, trading electrum for steel and sacred geometry for structural engineering, but the fundamental blueprint remains. The obelisk is a shape written into the human story, a constant reminder of our deepest ambitions and our most profound mysteries. So, as we conclude this exploration, the invitation now passes to you. Look at the obelisks in your world, whether you encounter them in person, in photographs, or in the pages of history books. Look at the familiar spire in your nearest city square, or the image of Cleopatra's Needle standing against a foreign sky. And ask yourself the question that has fueled this entire journey: what secrets are they still keeping? Do you see a grand trophy, a testament to human vanity and imperial power? Or do you see the hint of something more, a finely tuned device, a resonant antenna, a key to a lost science of energy and consciousness? There is no single right answer, only the richness of the inquiry itself. Your perspective, your intuition, your curiosity are the next chapters in this ancient story. We have traveled this path together, but the map is far from complete. Share your thoughts, your theories, and your own sense of wonder in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation, this collective unraveling of one of history's most captivating enigmas. And if you're hungry for more journeys into the hidden corners of our past, don't forget to subscribe and join us as we keep seeking the truth behind the world's greatest